Good afternoon, morning, or potentially evening, everybody out there on the internet. My name is Dan, and this is episode 69 of the Lookout Sir Warhammer 40,000 podcast. Welcome, one and all, to this, the 69th episode of this fabulous, outrageous romp through the wondrous world of Warhammer 40,000. And joining me as ever to, embark on this incredible adventure is my good buddy Phil. How's it going, Phil?
I'm very good, thank you.
Did you enjoy my tee-hee-hee to indicate that, the number 69 is synonymous with filth?
I know. I sort of feel like we should be reviewing the Header Knights of Slaanesh.
Well, potentially. We should diversify our portfolio.
Exactly. Do some AOS and then we can stick it in.
Exactly. But we're not doing that, actually. What are we doing today, Phil? What's on the agenda?
Well, I believe we're talking about terrain. All things terrain. The rules, the models, what does it mean, building tables, anything to do with terrain. That's what we're talking about.
The dark arts of board and or terrain manufacture and the impact that it has on our gaming world.
Yes.
But
the one thing that everyone needs, technically, to play a game that so few people actually own.
I mean, they do take up a lot of space, but, let's before we get into all of that, hit things off with a 5-star review.
Well, howdy, partner. These boys keep joshing us about with all their chitter-chatter about little plastic figurines. They've asked me to do this jingle for them. I don't know what they're talking about half the time. But anyway, now it's time for that 5-star review. Thanks for listening and enjoy the rest of the show. And let's all pray that it doesn't go on as long as it did last week. Yeehaw!
So, Phil, this 5-star review comes from Australia again. We've had a lot of Australians sharing their love. I feel like clearly we were a best kept secret for the United Kingdom, but we have now obviously been discovered by our brethren, our 40k fan boys and girls in the land down under. So yeah, we've had a good amount of.
We've gone global.
We have gone global. I mean, to be honest, though, I imagine that this show works better for Australians than it does for those in America, given the fact that some of the kind of general sentiment and, ideologies and humour that we try to exemplify in this podcast.
You're talking about the 80s cartoon references that they surely have that the Americans wouldn't.
Maybe. I mean, again, it's difficult to know. But my point is it's obviously great to see all this love from the Australians, and obviously we appreciate that. But we obviously appreciate whatever love we can get from wherever it's coming from. So if any of you out there wish to, further supply us with love, you need only go on to places where it is possible to leave a 5-star review and do so, and eventually you'll get called out on the show, much like John Pastor Pastor Lelak via Apple Podcasts of Australia. He has said, a wonderful escape, 5 stars. Magical. My favourite 40k podcast, the lovely dulcet tones of Phil, Dan, and Joe, and the ever-extending run times makes this the perfect escape from a crazy world. Now, obviously, we probably need to acknowledge the fact that the run times have been slightly more streamlined lately due to our new weekly format, and obviously we don't have Joe anymore, so there is a certain level of disingenuousness to this podcast review, but we still feel like we deserve this 5-star review, Phil, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, even for a weekly podcast, we are still probably 3 times the length of an average podcast. So we're still up there. We're still up there. We've got the numbers in terms of the number of minutes and seconds that this podcast will run for.
There you go. There we are. Those aren't rookie numbers. This is the way it goes. And obviously, the lack of Joe, I feel, is only enhanced things. I mean, obviously, I don't feel that. I miss him dearly. Oh, but anyway, the banter, off-tangent conversations, and love of tea makes it feel all the more homely. Now, I have to admit, I do not have a great love affair with tea, but Phil here easily compensates for that. I mean, how many teas have you had today, Phil?
A good 7 to 8, easily. on
8
on
teas.
easily. Yeah,
Mate, that is more teas than I have probably drank in 10 years.
Jeez, you're doing it wrong.
Mate, clearly, I'm not even that much of a coffee guy, right? Like that's the other thing. Like people say to me, like, "Oh, you big into coffee?" Then it's like, no, not really. I just drink water all the time. Really boring.
Well, it is. Well, that is also good to do. You're meant to have like your odd 2 liters, isn't it, a day? Your minimum. I do that, but then I also have another 5 liters of tea on top.
My goodness, man. I mean, tea is the drink of doers, though, isn't it? Your productive drink, the tea. Maybe I should indoctrinate it into my
It does, but it
routine.
also explains why I spend so much time going to the loo.
Well, exactly. Exactly.
Gives you a bit of a weak bladder.
Do you ever treat yourself to a garden wee?
No, I try and avoid that. I think there's been 1 or 2 times in this house where the bathroom has been occupied by a small child having a bath or shower or whatever, and they're going to be in there for a good half an hour. And I've been drinking copious amounts of tea or water in the shed, and I come in, I literally got to go. And I've just had no other choice but to water some plants.
Well, there you go. I would say it is my preference to have a garden wall.
Really?
I actually find it really exciting. It's something, I don't know, it's something very weird about me.
Is it the naturist in you?
I think that's what it is. That is what it is. The only risky thing, right, and I know where this is going off a tangent from this 5-star review, the only risky thing is the school bus stops exactly outside my back garden, right? So kids doing the school run. And in the winter months where the trees have dispersed, shedded their leaves, it's very clear what I'm up to should the kids' bus arrive at that time. So I'm always conscious of the fact that, when the kids' bus arrives around, say, like 3 o'clock. So it's a no weeing zone between 2 and 5. But outside of those hours, it's just pandemonium. It's horrific. Anyway,
next episode you'll end up on some kind of list, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm forever avoiding those potential perils. It's a balancing act. Anyway, combined with some excellent 40k knowledge, which is obviously nice of you to say, not being afraid to speak unpopular truths and making bold, grandstanding statements without having read the facts. It's an easy win for me. I mean, all of that is accurate. We do definitely possess a certain amount of knowledge, and we do like to make rather grand statements without having any real understanding of what we're talking about. So that's good. Although the two don't necessarily feel like they combine that much, but here we are. It's an easy win for me. Bonus points, they are English, which is true. And their banter and humour translates for us Australians. Need to keep up the great work, team. John Pastor Eilick, whatever his name is. There you go. I told you at the start, Phil, see, Australian humour resonates relatively well with English humour. Fact, he said it there. Anyway, come on, we've taken long enough over this as it is, Phil. Say thank you and let's get on with it.
Well, thank you, John. And the name rang a bell. It's Pastor, I think it's Levac. It's Levac.
Oh, I couldn't tell if that was, because it's weird, because I thought it was a capital I. But
it's either 2 capital I's or 2 lowercase L's.
It could be a capital I and a lowercase L.
But I recognise the name. We follow each other on Instagram, and I'll plug him. In fact, Pastor_Levac, Levac is a very good Instagram account. The quality of his work is top notch. I highly recommend it. Thank you for the kind words as well. That the show, not just me, but Dan included, and that other person who went somewhere. Glad you're enjoying the show. Glad you enjoy the English humour, the cups of tea. Thank you very much.
There we go. Beautifully done. As I say, if anyone else would like their 5-star review read out on the interwebs, just leave us one somewhere. Equally, you could go to our YouTube page, our Facebook page, our Instagram page, and say nice things in those domains, and we'll probably seek to regurgitate it here because, as we've made it abundantly clear, we have little to no scruples when it comes to this stuff. We're just out there for all the love. So, thank you very much, everyone. We hope you enjoy the show. We're going to get straight into it after the traditional transitional noise. Woo! So let's now have a conversation about what some go so far as to call the third player of the game, and that is the terrain or the board of which you play Warhammer 40,000 upon. So I think everyone's journey is relatively different with terrain and the table of which you play tabletop wargaming on. But it is fair to assert that in so many instances, it is incredibly rare for a 40k gamer specifically, or any tabletop wargamer, to prioritize boards. I think it's much more of a necessity than we necessarily acknowledge a lot of the time, but the willingness of players early doors to want to build tables or build terrain or build, gaming spaces is probably very low on the list of priorities, wouldn't you say so, Phil?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's people that do enjoy it and they do prioritize it, and that's like their thing. There's definitely some amazing sort of scenery builders out there, either on YouTube or on Instagram or just out in the wild. But they are like the exception that proves the rule. Like most people either don't own any terrain, they own very little of it. It's possibly quite basic or not even painted. I think even a lot of people like myself, I've got a small amount of terrain. I don't have a table big enough to play 40k on. I mean, with the new size, potentially just about I could squeeze a game on. The terrain I have got built is the Kill Team, and it was the Kill Team Sector Imperialis stuff, so I've got some nice ruins. It's just all built. I like the fact that it's coloured plastic, so I don't need to worry too much about painting it. But I do keep looking at it going, I should really paint it.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting because I would argue probably maybe 10% of 40k gamers aggressively invest in terrain. And I would say of that 10%, maybe 25% of that, a quarter of that, actually become really dedicated to, manufacturing tables and terrain as part of their active hobby, because it does require a lot of space. I mean, as someone who has amassed a lot of terrain and has sought to paint and make lots and lots of, terrain so as to facilitate my own personal gaming space, I can easily, agree that it is a very labor intensive, but also very space consuming part of the hobby. And I understand, as a kid getting into this, you're probably not going to be prioritizing building a massive board or getting a fantastic range of beautiful terrain. But that in a way becomes one of the more interesting aspects of it, because ultimately it is by far and away the most important thing when it comes to playing this game. Because if you do not have a surface to play on and some, terrain features to immerse you into, the atmosphere, the hobby world, the fictional universe that we're creating around ourselves here, it definitely does break the immersion and also render the requirement for you to paint these beautiful miniatures so well very relatively obsolete. And I think, for myself, Phil, I don't know what your early experiences were, but I always remember that when I was a child growing up, we had a really large green table that my dad had built for me and my brothers when we were really young kids, to put what was called a brio set on it. So in the UK, there was this like old train set, like this wooden train set kit called brio. And it was all just like wooden, train tracks that you would lay out on the floor. My dad had taken it upon him to build this really nice long table. I mean, it was longer than it was wide by quite a significant margin. I would probably say it was probably like a 2 foot by 6 foot table. So very narrow, very long. But my early 40k experiences was essentially repurposing that with the card terrain that came in the second edition box set.
Oh, yeah, I remember the card terrain, yeah. Prior to that, I did the old green felt sheets. But that was more predominantly when I was probably a bit younger, like 10 or 12, and was playing Warhammer Fantasy and not 40k. I think when I got to 40k, it was I'm just probably doing it on my mate's carpet with some bits or on a table. Again, no kind of coloured board or anything.
Yeah. I mean, it was crazy, right? Because, I mean, I would go around my friend's place and we might play on his kitchen table with just, the odd pile of books, maybe, an ice cream tub and something like that. It was always like really, really lo-fi in terms of what it was that we were playing with.
Did you make those cactus items, the Warhammer Citadel like terrain making book? They had some great things. One of them was like a ball of polystyrene that you blast, I think, with like a hairdryer or something that sort of makes all the polystyrene like bobble up and gives it a rough surface, and then you chuck a load of cocktail sticks in there to make a kind of cactus size thing. That was one of the few bits of terrain I think I actually remember making, and I think still have somewhere.
Amazing.
Tucked away in my parents' loft.
Oh, if it wasn't in your parents' loft, you should have gone and tried to find it so that you could have posted it on Instagram around this.
True.
This episode as a little callback to it. But yeah, I think I never made that one. I made a lot of bunkers, a lot of industrial buildings. My granddad was a really great woodworker, and he had a fantastic workshop for when he used to be a professional carpenter. And me and my brothers would muck around in there building these more industrial shapes where it was easy to get like little offcuts of wood and make it into different things. And there was a number of items that we were all quite proud of. My brother Rory made this absolutely fantastic orc fortress thing because he was really a dab hand when it came to more kind of sculpting and making stuff. And we were lucky in that regard because we were all quite creative and quite invested in early doors. So we built up a relative collection of it. But ultimately, as time went on, as people fall out of the hobby. I mean, my brothers all lost interest in this hobby as we went along. I'm the only
fools.
One. I know, fools. I mean, or am I?
Think how much money they've saved.
I know, right? I know, but yeah, don't make me think about that. Don't make me cry. But yeah, I suppose that's the thing, isn't it? Right? Because early doors, we all have these much more low key things, and I think as well, though, I think what's really interesting for me as a player is that because I've grown up with this hobby, because I've gone through the various stages of different levels of financial and general kind of like space abilities, as it were. At the end of the day, it was very difficult for me to convince my mother that we should dedicate a part of the house to this very specific hobby. I mean, that was crazy. Whereas now, I have my own house. I can dedicate the space that I feel is necessary, that I can negotiate with my darling wife anyway. And ultimately now I'm in that situation where I can start to build boards and have them permanently housed and tables and things like that, which is fantastic. And, I think if we go back through the history of things, early doors Games Workshop, as you've alluded to, Phil, with what you were saying about how they used to write White Dwarf articles and how they used to do stuff. It was all about experimentation. It was all about expression. It was all about you doing what you wanted to make a battlefield that ultimately, met your expectations. And Games Workshop stores were the same. I always remember you go into a Games Workshop store, all those tables were custom. Like they were all custom jobs. Like maybe some of them just had the standard old forests that were taken from train sets or whatever, and they had the Imperial Bastion or the Imperial there was another like tall tower one, like a bunker system and the rest of it, and these were like cardboard terrain pieces with like little plastic.
That wasn't it the Imperial Bastion was the
was the
large
fire
cardboard
base
one.
Yeah, fire base.
And there was a fire base. Yeah. I think I had one of those. There was a cool sort of bunker, almost like a sort of entrenched wall, like a defense line, because it had two bunkers at either side. I think that was a tutorial in one of the White Dwarfs that I remember doing. That was good fun. Or when using cereal cardboard to build those.
Those were the days, man. And that's the thing, though, right? Like, I mean, that was the situation. You go into Games Workshop stores, all the boards were customized, and the guys were doing like hobby, classes on making certain bits of terrain. And it was it was so much more of a creative outlet within the hobby and something that was very different back then. But obviously, as time goes on, GW has now standardized their terrain kits. It's become another revenue stream for them. They've embrace that part of their business and now do a number of official GW products that they specifically write rules for. And what's interesting to me is really kind of exploring that concept and then trying to kind of debate the impact of that, but then also the impact of the third parties and what they're doing with their own terrain kits. That's being, people like Battlefield in a Box that are producing, these really fantastic, straight out of the box kits where you just basically pull the thing out of the box and it's ready to use. You've got all the various different manufacturers of MDF terrain and what they're doing in that space, and a number of other.
That? I think it was maybe a Kickstarter. It's like a pop-up book terrain.
Yes.
So there's a bunch of pop-up books that you open up and the terrain, like the ruins, fold up, pop up.
Yeah.
That's a bit mad, but quite ingenious at the same time.
Yeah. It's incredible, right? And there's so much choice and there's so much stuff. And I guess before we get into that, we should probably start by talking about the realm of battle boards. So for those of you who blinked and missed it, because I appreciate some people are new to the hobby or returning to the hobby or any variable there are of, but Games Workshop's most, robust solution to the tabletop gaming situation was to produce plastic boards that went under the name of Realm of Battle. And for Warhammer 40,000, you had a handful of different options. You could either, in the end, just get the standard Realm of Battle, which was essentially a series of hills and flat panels that were textured with, mud effects, and you could obviously paint these up and flock them and do that side of things. So they had a good level of sort of 3D space as these hills were kind of built into these plastic boards. You also had the Cities of Death boards as well, which were notoriously dodgy because they had all of these like guttering systems molded into it. So again, another nice 3D effect. But if you ever tried to roll a dice on them, you inevitably never could roll a dice properly because they would always inevitably fall into the guttering.
Am I right in thinking they don't sell those anymore?
Correct, yeah. So those are now discontinued. You can find them on their web store, but they are not for sale.
I think they still maybe sell like one tile from time to time for like armies on parade, or your local Games Workshop will sell that. It's weird because that was the last sort of kind of plastic Games Workshop tiled table system that they had, and that one actually only came out maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Maybe it was a bit more, but it was it feels relatively recently. Was it? I'm pretty sure maybe it was like 8, but even then, like,
are you talking about the original Realm?
No, not the original. The Cities of Death one, because I remember that came out when I got back into the hobby, which is
possibly
under 10 years ago. But I mean, 10 years for a lot of people is still a long time. So.
Oh, totally, mate, totally. And the thing is, like, they introduced those things, and then they also had a range of Forge World tiles that were, varying different things. They also introduced, like, the Zone Mortalis boards that now have become their own set. But, this was game-changing for so many people, because prior to this, the idea of a modular table solution was completely alien to us. No one had really standardized anything. No one had really kind of agreed on any specific type of format for this. And all of a sudden, Games Workshop comes along and they go, here's our 6x4 table solution. And it's 6x4 because I guess that's just how it ended up, that they were able to do these 2x2 tiles. And that's just where we landed. And the Realm of Battle boards really, changed the landscape of the game, because all of a sudden, every store, every gaming location was using these Realm of Battle boards, and all of a sudden the custom tables with all the nice little nuances that those brought about all started to erode away. And over time, Games Workshop themselves got really creative with how they use those. I mean, famously, Games Workshop used to have this absolutely gorgeous gaming table at Warhammer World, where they had taken all of the Realm of Battle boards and essentially used all the hill sections, and then used the lower areas beneath the hills to then turn those into like a dam, and they had it all like filled with water and stuff.
Oh, nice.
It was gorgeous, man. Like they had this so they got really creative with them over time, but ultimately, these became the kind of standard. So when you go to Warhammer, or when you did go to Warhammer World, every single table were these Realm of Battle
Yeah.
boards.
And there was even so Forge World not only did the like city ones that had a bit of height to them, but they also did just custom sort of one-off ones. So there was a downed Thunderhawk as one. There's one that you've got which is like a little sort of bunker system. There was the sort of Space Marine sort of skyport. Another like Firebase one that they did as well. So they did a whole bunch of different tiles that you could get and sort of plug in, and they would all fit with the kind of classic Hills Realm of Battle tiles, which was all quite ingenious.
Yeah. And what was interesting about Realm of Battle is it was really innovative in a lot of ways. It was really good for a number of reasons. But it was also not nearly as intrusive as maybe people thought it might have been early doors, because one thing it was, as much as anything else, was expensive. And it was still cheaper for people to do their own custom jobs in their own homes or to build their own stuff. And some people were still very invested in that side of the hobby back then, right? So even though Realm of Battle existed and it had done a lot to standardize a number of aspects, it wasn't really robbing people of their creativity in so much as people were still kind of embracing that. And also because of how Realm of Battle was, it was still embracing a certain level of kind of 3D visuals within the way the tables were laid out. And there was still a lot of verticality. There was still a lot of different kind of surfaces that you played over. So I think Realm of Battle...
It was a good base for like, just for adding in your own terrain on top, really.
Yeah. No, absolutely. For me, I look at Realm of Battle and I think that Realm of Battle is still one of the best broad solutions. There are things I don't like about it and things that I always struggled with, especially when Games Workshop used to start using them in battle reports in White Dwarf magazine. Because one of the things that really always frustrated me about Realm of Battle was the fact that the lines were clearly drawn. So you always sort of broke your immersion a bit because you always saw the cracks, as it were. So there was a charm to the old tables because they were mostly built as one big piece. So you never had to see the fact that there was a clear 2x2 square, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think most people understand that that's the practical trade-off of, do you want something modular, then you're going to have these sort of joins on every 2x2 versus one custom table which doesn't have it, but then that is literally one table that you're stuck with and it's not modular at all.
No, absolutely. But bar that minor gripe of the overall system, I still think Realm of Battle works really well, and I think it, is enough of an interesting modular system that it creates some interesting things. So for me, I look at the Realm of Battle period of time and I think to myself, that was a net positive overall. I think it was a useful solution. I don't necessarily think it was the best in some regards, but I think at least it satisfied a very specific niche and gave people something custom. I mean, what was your vibe on Realm of Battle, Phil? I mean, you played your fair share of games on Realm of Battle boards. What do you reckon of them?
For sure. I really like them. Like, they're still good even to this day. I guess a little bit dated. The city one that the Games Workshop produced, like the plastic one, looks lovely, but very overly detailed. And as you said, not the best to actually play on in terms of rolling your dice.
And really doesn't work with terrain either.
Well, the weird thing about that is that was just before they started to release Sector Imperialis and a whole new suite of terrain, but none of it fitted. Like, they deliberately designed roads and places for where your buildings could go, but nothing actually slotted together. So if your column pieces could have actually somehow slotted into the board and it was a bit more of a solid base, in the same way how the new Necromunda floor tiles slot in with the columns, like, that would have been fantastic, but that was just weirdly maybe too ahead of its time for them to do that. So it sort of slightly sat on top but could move around because there was always weird gaps around. So that one was an odd one to play on. I've seen some amazing like conversions using that board, like at Warhammer World. They did one where they kind of laid the roads at an angle, and they obviously had to cut bits out of it, so everything was at like a 45-degree angle, and then they made it multi-level, so the road went up a floor, and then they had other bits of detail filling in the sides effectively. Those looked phenomenal, and have been some of the best games I've played on those sort of really custom jobs. Obviously that's a lot of work to sort of make yourself, but what I like about all the Games Workshop terrain is it allows you as a good base to you can just throw some standard scatter terrain down on the table. But you can also go to town on it. It's like back in the day when pretty much all you had was the Imperial Bastion. People would still just take 20 of those kits and make amazing towers or fortresses and all sorts. And even with the old, was it Cities of Death terrain,
Cities of Death, yeah.
which was all right. It's
Good for its time.
Nowhere near as good as the new stuff, but for its time it was good, and it was modular, and people could create whatever they wanted with that. And you still can do that with the new one. So I like the kind of almost Lego aspect of it, that you give someone the building blocks to create what they want, but the instructions are there to be like, oh, you just want an L-shaped bit of ruin, here you go. So that's all good. I think the Cities of Death, the actual like the old hill one, I think is the most dated of the lot, but at least it did give you an interesting playing surface because it wasn't just a flat board. There were little hills. You couldn't really hide behind them or not. I will say the amount of times models won't stay on the hill or the slope and things slide down and then fall over. That was incredibly frustrating. So I agree. See why they got rid of it. If they could have somehow solved it and maybe made the hills a bit more stepped so models can actually stay on them properly, that would be so much better. I think the Forge World one, if I can interject, the Forge World city tiles, which had sort of roads in a different place to the Games Workshop ones, and they had effectively like these large bases for where your buildings go. So the buildings are all off the street level; they're like one floor up. Like those were always fantastic because it gave you natural like passages and alleyways. Just as soon as you put the tiles down before you've even put the buildings on. I loved the look of that. I said in the last episode I wish I'd got them.
Me too.
Even though I don't have the room for them. It's the sort of thing I would just buy and stick up in the loft for that one day when I own a mansion.
Yeah. I was funny because I talked to Joe about that, and he was saying to me that he knew someone who did have them, and he said it was like playing on 6 wobbly stools. But we've had that conversation before, even on this podcast. So yeah, it was always interesting because the Forge World tiles, are synonymous with dodgy molds, and I can tell you, having owned or presently owning one of those tiles, it was one of the most laborious tasks getting that thing to work properly. And it's still not 100% right, but it's close enough. But anyway, so look, I mean, I think to your point. Yeah, I probably actually, and it's funny because you just reminded me, Phil, I'd completely erased the memories of the
sliding models.
Yeah, of the sliding models, which was a real problem with those boards.
And now you're like, go away, hills.
Yeah, the thing is, right, is like, again, there's ways that you approach this stuff, and there's ways that you look at this stuff. In essence, I'm in favour of verticality within our board layouts. I'm in favor of that. And one of the things that we'll get to in a moment are some key kind of design features that custom boards always have that I think are sorely lacking in games of 40k. And I do feel like we need to, if we're going to continue the way we are, we need to start indoctrinating ways to replicate those even within the relatively limited capacity of very two-dimensional play surfaces, which are obviously gaming mats. So Realm of Battle had its time, and understandably, as much as it has its pros, one of its biggest cons is cost, and another one of its biggest cons is the flexibility of it. Right, at the end of the day, if you're organizing an event, a tournament, a campaign weekend, setting up 60 tables with Realm of Battle boards is incredibly tedious, incredibly difficult. However, if all you need to do is rock up and pull out, 60 mats and roll them out, it is easily, logistically, so much less hassle.
Yeah,
than
you also don't have to go to the effort of like painting them up.
Oh, totally.
It's all pre-made. It's all done for you.
And this is the conversation really, and I'm not meaning to just kind of hate on mats because I have mats and I've, indoctrinated those into my own play at this point. But I do always feel like when I'm playing with mats that I'm settling for an inferior product that I am ultimately doing it purely because of my desire to replicate tournament situations. But I really don't like the two-dimensional nature of the mat. And I also don't like what I feel like the overarching tournament philosophy is doing to the game, and how it is making it feel much more two-dimensional than it ever has before. And even the littlest thing of having a few hills on a Realm battle board transforms how the game feels to play versus these flat surfaces. But I mean, where do you stand on the mat situation, Phil? I mean, you relatively okay with it? I mean, what's your vibe?
I've played on a bunch of mats. My biggest bugbear about mats, and this is such a petty thing, I absolutely hate the way my dice roll on the mat. They bounce all over the place. Like they don't seem to roll as well. I seem to roll lower than when I'm on a Realm of Battle, nice and clunky, got a nice sound to it. I seem to get much better results than when I'm on a mat. Now, this is completely subjective. It's just me.
When you're on a Realm of Battle board?
When I'm on a Realm of Battle board, I roll better. I'm rolling a bit more hot, as they say in the parlance, than when I'm on a mat and it's just all bouncing willy-nilly all over the place. Obviously, Realm of Battle is a bit more noisier. You get that kind of clunky sound, but I'm kind of used to it. I kind of like it.
It's a charming part of the game.
Exactly. I kind of always hate flocked Realm of Battle boards. I don't like flocked stuff. I think it looks a bit rubbish. Fine for Warhammer Fantasy, maybe in the old days. Less so for 40k. I think 40k Scorched Earth, sort of, deserty city vibe is a better look. Overall, I mean, mats have a practicality to it. I think they've become a real popular choice, probably not just from tournaments, but especially from like YouTubers. They're kind of back reps. But I get it from their point of view, where, you're doing battle reports every single week. You want to vary up the terrain. The easiest way to do that is to buy 10 different mats, or even like 2 or 3, and you can just roll a different one out, and you've instantly got a different world to play on, a different setting, which makes sense. The other one is like, mats with scattered terrain, and by scattered terrain I mean pebbles and rocks. I sort of get why people do it, to make it look a bit more realistic. It kind of still looks a bit naff most of the time. You can't beat either a Realm of Battle board or a custom board where you've got all of that stuff, the stones and rocks, baked into it. But it's just so much more time consuming to make yourself. You've fixed everything in place. So therefore, even though you've got one, maybe 2x2 modular tile, everything that you've maybe added to that is on it, and you can't move it around in the same way that you could do with the mat. And I guess the other thing with mats, and that's a general thing, even with the 40k stuff and the 40k like printed stuff, is when sort of people just ignore what's on the mat. So they'll be like, here's a building and I'm putting it in a road. Sort of instantly breaks the immersion of it.
I totally agree with that. And I find the immersion of mats breaks massively, because I find that, again, mats to me are a product of their environment, which is tournament play, and also battle report channels and things of that nature. And in some instances they've been used to great effect, right? Like Striking Scorpion, for example, does a good job of making a nice looking board. However, compare what he's doing now, where he's doing like mats with scatter stuff, to maybe some of the battle reports he did early on. I remember he did a Apocalypse game where he played on a custom massive, like it was like 12 by 6 foot board, like really incredible Apocalypse table, where it was Tyranids charging down into this Imperial like armored facility, and it was Imperial Guard versus Nids. And, there was all this kind of like no man's land where the Nids were running in from. And then there's this really beautifully made Imperial facility. And you look at that and you just go, that is one of the most gorgeous boards that you would just want to play on, versus here is a crater with some pebbles around it. Here is a thing with some pebbles. It's just, oh man. And again, I think the thing is I understand the practicalities of why they've got to do this. I totally get it. I'm just saying that, should we all resign ourselves to that being our default, and should we be happy with that as the norm, because to me, I don't really ever like the idea of that becoming the norm. I like the norm being people making custom stuff and people having different experiences. And this really rolls on to the broader conversation around terrain in the general sense, not just the surface of play, but terrain. And I think one of the things that's been so interesting over the last 3 years is the ITC's efforts to standardize play. So it really happened, as mad as it sounds, it all started, as far as I remember, and again, forgive me if I'm wrong about this, but you can hopefully correct me, Phil. This all started at the LGT 2018. The infamous polystyrene mess.
Right, yes.
LGT 2018. So for those of you who weren't in the hobby at this time, the LGT was lauded as one of the, premier events of the ITC. It got heavy amounts of advertising support from the team at Frontline, heavy amounts of advertising and support from the teams of, different content creators.
Even
YouTube.
Games Workshop, didn't they, at the time?
They even had the endorsement of Games Workshop.
Yeah.
And it was an absolute disaster. Too many people crammed into one place. And one of the most notorious aspects of it was the quality of the terrain. They basically gave you 2 big L shapes made of this horrible looking polystyrene material, a little column of buildings that again were using this really ugly, horrible, polystyrene thing, and maybe some smaller ruins, right? But they had essentially said, yeah, the terrain isn't great, although they came to say it later. And to be fair, I don't think they ever actually really took that much responsibility for it.
I think they did. To be fair to them, they did sort of, I think it was a few weeks later, come out with like an apology message where they said we sort of overpromised and sort of ran out of time, or there was logistical problems, and they promised to do better the next time.
Which they did.
Yeah, it was better.
Based on all evidence. I mean, the LGT of 2019 was a spectacular event, according to all that attended.
I also got the impression, to give them some defense, not that they necessarily deserve it, that the narrative tables for the kind of little narrative campaign they were running was really good, because I think they were done by a different team or different people. But yeah, specifically the 40k sort of champion tournament was the one where it was a bit of a car crash. Yeah,
but irrespective of all of that, one of the overriding sentiments from everyone that was there was, yeah, the terrain wasn't great. However, the principles of what it represented led to some of the best games of 40k I've ever played. So a load of people turned up and basically saw the light. This is how we make 8th edition 40k better. This is how we...
L-shapes.
L-shapes. This is how we make the game of 8th edition less broken. Because do not misunderstand me, 8th edition had a massive issue with shooting armies all the way through. And the advent of the massive L-shape ruins massively changed the landscape, because all of a sudden your combat army had options. Flash forward to 9th edition, Games Workshop obviously taken on board a number of those learnings, and now we're in a situation where their terrain has very specific rules. And what I have seen from the tournament community is a desire to still maintain certain attributes that were in effect around 8th edition.
L-shapes.
And what's L-shapes? L-shapes. And what's interesting, well, not just L-shapes, though. L-shapes with line of sight blocking walls, right? And they're all specifically ruins, right? So again, forgive me for generalizing with tournament organizers and ITC players, but everything I have seen from ITC run events and attended, well, I haven't attended any 9th edition events, but everything I've observed, everything I've been told about, is telling me, at least in our local area and what I'm seeing in other events that are, photographed or broadcasted around the world, people are still using those big L shapes with line of sight blocking things, and they're all prioritizing ruins, because ruins have some very interesting rules mechanics that create this really shifting meta, which is to say that we are now in a situation, and what triggered me to have this conversation, I suppose, was when we got a question last week from the guy, was it Cantor Blue, asking about...
yes, shooting armies, can they do well when the meta is like close combat heavy? Yeah, that was
Yeah, exactly. And the statement I made at the time was, yes, because shooting is still good as long as you don't play these very, very specific styles of table that the ITC favour. And I think this is the question mark that I really wanted to kind of discuss with you, Phil, is where do we feel like, or what do we feel like the solution is in terms of this prevailing attitude? Because ultimately, as far as I'm concerned, I think we as a community need to reevaluate our relationship with terrain on a competitive basis. Personally, I always used to love, and still always love, themed boards. I like turning up to a tournament or any 100%. Gaming scenario and having to factor in the environment in my strategies. I like to come to a table and be presented by a challenge and to be able to spot advantages that table affords me. Whereas if I already know going into it what the tables are all the time, I can start to heavily optimize everything to very specific builds. And you can argue that that's a good thing because it means that it standardizes how people approach the game. But I personally feel like it's actually not really rewarding the best players. It's just rewarding the best list makers. And I think being good at writing lists is important, but it should not be 100% representative of who the best players are. Noting that obviously you can find yourself in a scenario where your list gives you an advantage in certain terrain setups. So, you can argue that there is a sort of an element of throwing stones in glass houses here. But my point is that I just find it interesting what has happened to the nature of the game, and I also find it very weird now that we deal in absolutes in the community discourse around this. This is right. This is how we have to play now. I don't agree. But what do you think, Phil?
Yeah, I think you said a lot.
Yeah,
let me try and process it. Basically, mirrored terrain, I think, is bad. I see the logic, and I think that was one of the things raised back in that LGT tournament, because they did the exact same setup for every single mission for every game. So everyone had a standardized and, in air quotes, fair game against your opponent, and you know that your game was the same as the person's on the other table. It wasn't sort of roll off dependent. It wasn't deployment type dependent as well. But I think it can just be too by the numbers when that happens. It's much better to have asymmetric boards, give the players a choice. The whole point about having a roll off to pick the deployment zone should be, do you want to try and, for your army, pick the best side of the table? And do you want to therefore have a slight disadvantage where you've got to put some models down on the table first? Now, maybe because it isn't the I'm deploying my whole army, you're then deploying your whole army, you've lost that balance, and it's like, oh, I'm only going to put one unit down and I've got tons and he's not got many. So actually me picking my deployment zone and putting a unit down isn't actually a disadvantage. So I'm just going to do that all the time. Asymmetric missions and deployment zones are always more interesting. I think one of the things we have potentially lost going through the editions is each mission has a fixed deployment zone, which sort of makes sense. But I quite like the idea of you're up against an army, it's like, oh, it's orcs, but it's like, let's roll off and say, oh, I've got Dawn of War, oh no, or oh, I've got Hammer and Anvil, ha ha ha. And that in itself completely changed the way you play against a particular type of army. So every single mission had a different play style based on the deployment zone, which also, you could never really set up your terrain for a particular advantage because you didn't know what the deployment zone was going to be. Whereas I think even now, so let's say you're not doing a tournament game, but and this is probably the wrong order, you would normally set up the terrain and then you maybe roll off for the map and the mission. And I think that's how you meant to do it. I think a lot of times people might go, what's the mission? And then you go, oh, cool, let's shuffle these bits about. And that's another thing that we not talked about is how, objective markers interact with terrain, because obviously you meant to put the objective markers down first, and then terrain second. So now, in theory, no objective markers should be inside buildings or terrain, and they can't go on sort of top floors or anything like that anymore when they used to, which did hugely give an advantage to armies that could fly, for example. But it did force people to go up the top, or at least consider that in their army. It's like, cool, you've got what was it, like you're doing Deathwing, like you've all got bikes or something, or your White Scars, you've done a whole bike army, cool, but all the objectives on my side of the deployment zone, I'm putting up a floor up, and they couldn't reach it, and they'd be like, that's not fair. And it's like, but you knew that's part of the rules, and yet you list builded in a way that it disadvantaged yourself. That's less of an issue now with how the vertical engagement range works. So you could still, if there was an objective on the top floor, not that you can, but if that was the case, then you could actually just be below it and you'd still be able to score it. So I don't know, there's a lot to unpack. I think L-shaped ruins are still kind of bad for the game. I think part of that might just be a hangover from people's collections, that they've got all that terrain from 8th edition and they don't want to sell it and make new stuff. I definitely remember playing at what was it, No Retreat, where their stuff was packed with line of sight blocking terrain, and it was physically line of sight blocking, which, while beautifully looking, isn't as practical to play on in 9th edition as it was in 8th edition because of the way the terrain rules work.
For me, there has to be a synergy that can enable us as players to reward a variety of armies. Clear lines of fire, clear inaccessible areas for anything other than specific types of units, clear advantages that certain things are able to exploit, right? So, for example, there must be a terrain layout where there are big areas where knights can roam freely, and there are pressure points applied to your enemy that means they have to come out and play. Right, that has to be doable in conjunction with constrained spaces where knights cannot interact. Equally, areas that flyers are able to exploit angles on and do other things. I mean, ultimately, when you boil it down, right, there's 5 things that you got to factor into a game of 40k. Really, really big stuff like knights, medium-sized stuff like tanks, flyers, infantry, cavalry, and bikes, right? That's like it, essentially. Now, those different types will have different variables. They might fly, they might, burrow underground, they might do whatever they do. But the point is those are your 5 kind of key archetypes, and they all occupy different footprints. So you need to have a terrain set up that has some natural advantages for everything while also having negatives, because that then creates some interesting gameplay nuances, because all of a sudden, you've got some objectives that really only infantry can contend over, and then you've got other areas where it becomes like a kill zone because massive scary things lurk about in those spaces. And these are the sorts of ebb and flow to gameplay that's really interesting to me. The other thing that I think we're drastically lacking in 40k boards, and that's depth. There are no holes in 40k anymore.
True.
And that is so bizarre, because what is the first thing someone does when they build a custom board?
What is it?
Come on, if you were making a custom board, what would you prioritize first of all?
Like some height.
But also probably, because I know you've made a custom board, you've forgotten yourself what you did.
Like craters and stuff.
Yeah, trench network is what you did.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
You built holes, right?
Yes.
People always, every time I've ever seen anyone talk about custom boards, they've always gone, we'll get a river running through the middle of it, like a canal or something, some sort of hole that creates depth, and that to me is maddening. It's like, okay, cool. How come we've not factored in impassable terrain like holes, because even something like that would be easy to implement on your mat scenario. You just need to basically introduce some areas where you can just put it over the top that basically creates these impassable lines. Because I think the thing is, to me, is I think the key to making the game better and making it a more interesting thing is creating more choke points and more essentially more areas of denials to stop people having free roaming ability.
What I liked about like older editions of the game, where you had things like rivers, which were pretty much impassable terrain unless you had a bridge, or you had, for example, a chimera, which had a special rule. It was an amphibious craft and it could go over these rivers. And I think that had that rule even up until like 7th edition. But like no one ever had rivers or anything similar to make use of that rule. And it was like, that was quite a cool, clever little thing that you could use just to add a different sort of level of dynamic play. Like I said, choke points I think sometimes can be really good, but then sometimes they can be really abused and sort of narrow the board down too much potentially. But then armies in 40k, especially more so than fantasy, have loads of fly abilities and ways of getting around it, so it's probably less of an issue in 40k. I can tell you why people don't do holes. It's because you can't physically make a hole. Like, what you have to do is you have to sit something on top that is raised up at the sides to then have a hole in the middle. So it's like an artificial thing. So if you have a trench network, what it is a hill on one side, and then you've got your trench inside this mini hill that still sits on that table. The best sort of version of that is, I'm trying to think what it was called. It was like the Imperial Trench Network, was it, that Games Workshop did? It was a nice little defensive line. Effectively, it was like a trench network. That was the thing that kind of could sit on the board, but look like a hole in the ground and act like a proper trench, but still thematically look correct being sat on the table. If you're going to do what I did, which was actually, so I used extruded polystyrene, and you cut into that, and that's like your ground, and then you can cut into it by like 6 inches to create your trench network. It's like, that's fantastic, but that is so much work. When I had done that, so I did one 2x2 tile, completely custom, using the Forge World or old Forge World trench network that they produced, because I paid an arm and a leg for it by eBay. I got enough to make out an entire table. I did that one tile for Armies on Parade, and I was like, every year I'm going to spend like a month or two building another tile, and in 6 years' time I'll have an amazing board. And I just never got around to it, because one, it was a pain in the arse basically to build. It was like a lot of effort, but also two, I just don't have the table space for an entire table. So that was like my lack of motivation to ever carry that on. I still desire one day to finish it off, and I'm sure I may well do.
Well, it was interesting that you said that, because I remember obviously as well though, and this again is sort of, again, it's one of the things about these printed mats that I think we're not fully exploring, because, for example, if you look at games like the Deathwatch game that they did with Gene Stealer Cult and Deathwatch. Do you remember what that was called? Kill Teams or something?
Oh,
yeah, it was just
Kill Team.
Was it called Kill Team? Anyway, it doesn't matter. You know the game I'm talking about. They did a mini game, and it was the series of Deathwatch
Overkill.
Deathwatch Overkill. Thank you. And in that, they give you a full set of tiles to play the game on, but there's so much empty space, because they've essentially built in like a network of platforms essentially. So there's lots of areas, lots of holes, lots of things that you need to navigate around. And to me, I just think, well, cool, why don't we just make these mats have a river network going through the middle of it, or do something like that, and then just honor it. Just be like, yeah, that is there.
I think a lot of printed mats do, but I would assume a lot of people don't go for those ones because they are maybe restrictive. I think if you're a more narrative player, you're doing Crusade, or you're a bit more of a casual gamer, or not necessarily too fussed about tournament sort of style, maybe you would go for those. But yeah, I mean, even mats, they're cheap. They're cheaper, but they're still not cheap. So most people will probably have
only about 40-50 quid, aren't they?
Yeah, but I mean,
not to suggest that that's cheap, but I mean, it's not 200 quid for a
exactly. But what I mean is, most people will probably buy one and be like, I've got my one mat. I don't need another one. It's probably very few people that are going to go, I'm going to buy 2 or 3.
Yeah, and I understand that. I'm just saying that it's one of those things that's just interesting to me, because as soon as you actually factor in that into the design of a table, you can immediately start to make things more interesting. You can immediately start to think about different ways of approaching it. And it just creates a whole different gaming experience. And I do think it's the key to unlocking better, more interesting games, because again, if you just think about level design in video games, you know, the delight of those things is the restrictions and the choke points and the tactical decisions that you have to make as a player to tackle your environment. And the same is true, or used to be true, in games of 40K. You know, it's fantastic when you're playing a game where there is a clear tactical advantage to controlling a point on the board. It's like, I need to have this bit under control because I need to own that bridge. And all of a sudden it becomes a completely different style of game. And I understand it's going to be impossible for this to get rolled out as something that could be massively available, but I'm just throwing it out there to get people to think about it and just think about what this means for them and their own gaming experiences and what it could represent as a challenge. Because ultimately, my major concern with 40K these days is we may as well just be playing on flat surfaces, because we are essentially, and that, you know, because so few people even massively exploit the benefits of the verticality of ruins, and I hardly ever see ruins go especially high. It's always just a series of flat surfaces. Everything that happens in modern day 40K happens, you know, on the 2-dimensional plane that is the mat, as it were.
Yeah, I think there's a few reasons for that, and predominantly that's not the fault of the rules, but it is the rules now which dictate why you don't really want to be on top of a ruin. I think one of them is the objective is always on the ground floor. The other one is that the height of the floors are now much higher. It's like 5 inches high. So your entire movement is effectively taken up just traveling for one floor. So that really discourages people putting models on like 1 floor up or even 2 floors up, because it will take them an entire turn just to get down. Whereas before, in the old Cities of Death, it was like 3 inches. So it was like not as much of your movement. So you could be up on a floor. In your turn, you could be like, great, I can jump down, I can move 3 inches, I can then, you know, advance to go a bit further. So I'm not really hampering myself by going up there. Whereas I think now people are like, if I put those models on there, I'm putting them on there because they're going to stay on there. And the game is so mobile, it's so focused on going out, getting objectives. It really discourages that kind of play. In verticality, so interesting, it looks so great. There used to be some even cool rules. So in the 8th edition rulebook, in the kind of narrative games, there was a special rule. It was like, if you were like 1 floor up and you were shooting down at something, you had an advantage. So you got +1 to hit. Now, imagine,
you're talking about Kill Team.
No, this is actual 40K 8th edition.
Really?
Those fluffy narrative campaign section, not even campaign, those narrative rules that we never really even looked at, or even ever played. It was one of the core rules in like the sort of city fights. If you're like high up on a building shooting something down lower than you got +1 to hit. Super cool. I'm a bit like, why isn't this a stratagem? Like, that's a really nice narrative thing that everyone could have access to. It encourages you to stick stuff up on a building that is also an easy target to hit back at the same time. That's always the downside of putting stuff up there, which is why I think people don't do it anymore because it's sort of, your heavy weapon teams are too squishy for the current state of the game that most people don't like to play them, or your Devastator squads and stuff like that. I think some armies have exceptions, but that's sort of why. And ultimately, it does create this thing of you'll have all this amazing terrain, but no one will be on it. They'd much rather be behind it because then they're getting the benefit of the obscuring rule, which is the other reason why I think people don't like to be on these terrain pieces. I've watched a few battle reports recently online, and knowing we were talking about this episode, I was factoring that in. There was an amazing Tabletop Tactics, love their stuff. The last battle report they put up, it was like this amazing terrain. There's sort of not quite mountains, but like cliff faces with the tectonic drill terrain piece on the side. You've got all these Adeptus Mechanicum, the refineries and stuff. Pretty much, I'm pretty sure this is correct. Every single unit never went on a single piece of terrain. They all are behind it. They're all on the ground floor.
That was their battle report between Ultramarines and Death Guard, right?
Yeah, that's the
one. I watched that one as well. And again, same thing. Like, again, really nice looking stuff. They got a load of Battlefield in the Box stuff. They got a load of 40k stuff. Look gorgeous. But again, never really saw them interact with it or it become a factor. Now, it's very weird.
I don't know if that was just a weird coincidence about that one particular battle report we both watched, or if that is just the general prevailing wind of most games of 40k now, where you use ruins to hide behind, not be in or on, because there's less of an advantage to that nowadays.
Can I just say as well, and sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I hate the ruins rules. I think ruins need to go. I think they are the worst part of the 40k terrain rules. And here's why. There is no negatives associated with ruins at all. In so much as I can exist in it, I can pass through it, I can shoot out of it, I get a save when I'm in it, I get obscured when I'm behind it. It's just a series of overwhelming positives. And I think there needs to be trade-offs. I think we need a situation where terrain is positioned in such a way as it is a wall and you can't walk through it. And I think that is an important thing that we need to start incorporating into our rule set.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it on a podcast before, or maybe we were just casually chatting. As I like the idea that not all ruins are breachable. I like the idea that some units have the breachable rule them baked into them, and that everyone else effectively has to spend an action making it breachable. So if you're a regular infantry squad, your action is I'm doing breaching, so at the end of my turn I can finally finish off my movement or something to go through it, but I basically have not shot in exchange to pass through it. Things like gene stealers, they can go through any cracks willy-nilly in a ruin, so they automatically can just pass through ruins. Obviously things like Harlequins with their flip belts, they can do it too. So certain units should have that ability, but I think just giving it wholesale to every single unit is problematic. But then I do remember playing lots of games of 6th and 7th edition where that was the case, and you had to go through the door, and it 6th and 7th still had the same ridiculous ambiguity around a ruin. Ruins have been these ridiculous rule sets for years. And again, I don't mind it, but I think the problem is it's come to a real tilting point in so much as, especially with the prevalence of them in competitive play. Because now, here's the thing, right? This is a legitimate thing that you got to think about if you're playing Ultramarines. I want to run Roberte Gilliman. He is the Primarch. He's the best character. Cool. But he's bad in competitive play. And the reason he's bad in the competitive setting is he doesn't have the infantry keyword. And as soon as you don't have something with the infantry keyword, it doesn't interact with ruins. And if it doesn't interact with ruins, it's not competitive. That is madness. Yeah. I think there's a few issues there. So one, I think if you if you didn't have the ability to just pass through walls, it really does slow the game down. Like even with the vehicles, it's like, cool, I've literally got to spend an entire turn or two just going round this one building. Like I'm not going anywhere. It does mean you can't really get very far in the game.
But where the complication comes in, though, and this is where the other thing drives me mental about the ITC rulings is okay, cool. You have decided to use ruins, and you've decided because it speeds up gameplay. But then you've also introduced the arbitrary scenario or set up the terrain specifically. So is the outer walls of this ruin you cannot see through because you've blocked them off. And that's where it goes bad. It's like, if you can't draw a line of sight for it, you shouldn't be able to walk through it.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, I get that. So if there's doors or there's windows, then you could go, it's breachable. I mean, even back in, I think it was 6th and 7th edition, they specifically said in the codex, like, they have grenades and they have breaching charges, like they burst through, they make a small hole. It's like the infantry should have that ability, which I kind of get.
Yeah, fine.
But yeah, I think the specific thing you're talking about, where what you have is ruins that aren't standard Games Workshop ones, which have lots of holes in, and that is what the current set of obscuring ruins rules are all tailored for. So when you're behind it, you can't be seen through it, but once you're inside it, there's tons of windows everywhere, so you can be seen, you can shoot out, you can be shot at, which is the important thing. But if you've got this custom terrain that is, as you say, is just a solid block of wall, it massively advantages close combat units. You can sort of be hiding in there, can't be seen, you can't shoot out, but you don't want to shoot out or you don't care about shooting out because next turn you're moving out and you're charging, and that's all you really care about. So yeah, I think the magic box, it's not quite the magic box, which was a thing in ITC where you basically had 4 walls ruined, so once you were in it, you couldn't be seen, you couldn't be shot at, but there would always be an objective in there, so it would really fade, or there'd be an objective nearby, so your unit could hide in there. The only way to shift that unit off was to send another infantry unit in there into close combat. So it really shifted the meta, favoring kind of close combat units to be able to pick those things off.
It just creates this, it's a having your cake and eating it too scenario, and it annoys me because it's that thing where it's like, look, I do not believe this, because here's the thing, the general prevailing consensus is close combat, durable close combat armies are the best now because of the way that we have tilted the terrain conversation. And that's my frustration. It's like, look, this is madness. Like, we need to reach a better consensus, because unfortunately with the reduction in board sizes, and we didn't even get around to talking about that yet, but I mean, that's another thing that irks me so much, is 6x4 is a fantastic size to play games on. 44 inches by 60 inches may not sound like a massive reduction. It changes everything, because again, massively favors very specific armies, custodes, very specific types of Space Marine. It's going to do the Death Guard, a World of Good in a moment. It's just this is my thing. Please, can we reach a point where we agree that if you're going, you can't have everything your own way. It's like, please, come on. Like, if you want a situation where I can't see you, then you're not allowed to just fly through that wall. Because going back to my Gilliman point, the reason why you see most competitive Ultramarines lists, or at least most that have ever existed, running Marnius Calgar rather than Gilliman, is because he's got the infantry keyword. Therefore, he just moves through walls and stuff. And that's so important to the way competitive armies are built now. And I just think it's laughable. I love your idea, Phil. I love the idea of certain types of units can have breachable. That, to me, perfect. That solves so much of the problem. The problem is it's going to be a long time before they introduce that. And also, there's not really an attitude from the competitive scene to do that, because the competitive scene have accepted that this now is how you play the game. You hang out, not doing anything for a couple of turns, being this looming combat threat, and then you just run out and then bog people down. And I just look at that stuff. I remember the first time I experienced that in a competitive game of 8th edition with those terrain setups, and I went, oh, is is this what competitive 40k really is? I mean, this was like early on in me getting into competitive play, and I was like, I'm not sure I like this. I'm not sure I could keep playing this like this. This isn't fun for me.
Yeah, so another aspect that you've sort of hinted at or talked about a little bit is the prevalence of ruins being pretty much the only terrain feature on board. And I think that is a negative effect on tables. And if you look at the new, is it Battlefield in a Boxes, the Games Workshop ones that they do?
I think they're not called Battlefield. Battlefield in the Box is a specific thing. They're called. They are called Battlefields. Yeah, no, they're called Battlefields.
The new Games Workshop ones is there are some ruins, but the majority of the terrain that you get in those kits is like the pipelines. The pipelines, which are, if I'm not mistaken, they're obstacles. Is that right? Or barricades? Barricades. Yeah. And they have their own rules to them, and it's like, but you very rarely see them on the tabletop as much. I think it's just historically everyone's gone ruins, woods, craters. They're the three things that are kind of important. Whereas now, but I think things like, you know, obstacles and sort of these smaller scatter terrains, you know, crates are always good just because they're line of sight blocking. I think, you need a bit more of a mixed bag of terrain to make your tables more interesting. So you're not just using the obscuring rule because everything's a ruin, for example. And I think that, again, shifts the weight more in a balanced favor of both mixed combat shooting armies. If you just have ruins, I think it becomes a bit of a boring game, with the exception of if you're doing a specific theme where you are like, this is a ruined city, lots of ruins, but even the odd one ruined wall here and there is classed as a barricade. It's not like a ruin per se with obscuring keyword. So you can still theme your army, theme your board, around a particular thing, like, you know, a city, which I think is how most people play 40k. But still using the whole suite of rules. And again, the keywords that are applied to terrain is only really a recommendation. I think everyone has gone, this is the standard and this is what we're going to do. But in tournament play, I'm sure that will be the case. But if you're playing at home, you can, call whatever you want, whatever rules that you want. So you can kind of go, this ruin actually, rather than it being obscuring, is dense, so it's -1. And I kind of like the idea that there's lots of -1 terrain dotted around, more so than the obscuring stuff, because I found the obscuring stuff, it's interesting, but I think early doors, and I mean even now I've still not played a whole amount of games of Ninth. The first few games I found like, cool, I've got my Contemptor Dreadnought hiding behind this building, so you shouldn't be able to shoot at me, that would be great. But then in your turn you just moved slightly to the left and you're like, cool, I can see your toe. So because of the rules, even though 90% of my model is actually still behind the ruin, but because you can draw line of sight to, like, from your base to my base from a part, it's like, cool, I can just now shoot you. And you're like, oh god, it's actually quite hard to hide sort of units sometimes behind these things. So it sort of feels like and this was a very early reaction to those rules, as it doesn't seem to do what it should do. And I think maybe that's just, I even now I still need to get into it. But I think the fact that they haven't really FAQ'd the terrain rules, I think most people will generally say the terrain rules are really great and they're really happy with them. And I think most people are.
I agree. I think the terrain rules are, in a way, good. I think I prefer aspects of the old rules for them, but I don't like all aspects of it. Like, I'm so happy that we don't have to roll 2d6 and take the highest when moving through anything now. Like, that was mental when it used to have to be like, oh, difficult terrain test. I was like, oh god. But yeah, I mean, the fact that that's gone is no bad thing, and I think there are some net positives to it. I think, again, though, it's just those things where really, like, Games Workshop are very craftily written a rule set that really favors their own stuff, which is fine. So it's made the third party ranges a bit ridiculous, but also so much of the ITC stuff, so much of the tournament scene is using third party stuff, and so much of these guys are favoring lots of ruins, lots of whatever, and that to me just is.
Well, I think that is it's almost down to the kind of terrain that third-party people produce. It's like ruins is something easy. You can make it out of MDF super easy. I've seen some amazing stuff in MDF, but you wouldn't normally get a bunch of woods made of MDF, or if you do, it probably doesn't look that good. I think that's why most people go for like ruins or buildings of some kind, because they're flat, easy to build constructs from a manufacturing point of view.
There are some incredible MDF kits out there for incredible things other than just ruins. It's just the thing is that, for whatever reason, it's just become the prevailing thing. And that's the thing with those giant L shapes that people love. Just make them walls. Like, even if just those became impassable walls, like that would change things and that would make things better. Admittedly, you'd still end up in situations where things with the fly keyword had a key advantage, but the fly keyword doesn't let you go over a wall when you're charging. It does when you're moving, but not when you're charging. And again, that would at least create a bit of a risk reward to some of this stuff. Because I think the issue is at the moment is that Games Workshop have actually done a really good job of making this game difficult to break, but then the competitive community have gone, yes, but what if we completely control the environment? Then only these things raise to the top. So they've kind of themselves they've purposely created this meta. And then Games Workshop are trying to balance things to these metas. And there are people out there who are seeing assault units have their points increased going, these are terrible. I don't understand why you've made it more expensive for me to take them, because when I'm playing with my mates and we're playing on a normal board, I'm getting shot off in turn one. And now you're telling me I've got to spend 35 points for this model. It's like, what? But anyway, because that is, again, one of the interesting dynamics that we have as a community is we have a system that is being made to tailor to competitive requirements. But ultimately, not everyone is playing to those same requirements. And again, it's just interesting, mate. It's just interesting. But Phil, what did our community have to say on the topic? We put out on the old social medias that we were going to discuss this, and you got a few responses, right, Phil? You got people saying, hey, why don't you talk about this? So how's about we hear from those guys and maybe try and answer some of their questions, eh?
Here we go. We've got ethical ice cream.
Ethical ice cream?
Sorry, ethical ice cream truck.
Okay.
Over on the old Instagram.
Using like an electric ice fan,
maybe, or it's all vegan ice cream or something.
Maybe.
He says, hi, really enjoying the weekly shows. As a new player from 8th edition, I would like GW to give more guidance on terrain use. A full battlefield box would be a good start. The fold-out boards are quite good, and then basic scenery and rules. If they treat the board as a third army, encourage people to collect it as such, then it would be a better game. I also think that once every army has a terrain piece, then they might be free points to use X amount. Love the jingles and hardly miss that other guy.
I told you, Phil, the jingles are top quality, right?
Really? So a few interesting points. One of them is talking about collecting terrain as a third army, or as like an extra, the third player almost, which is correct. One thing we haven't talked about, because it sort of skipped us all by, was the specific, like almost like a tournament pack, tournament terrain rules, where you buy and allocate a certain amount of, one half of the terrain you bring, your opponent brings the other half, you both throw it down. And what sort of the interesting element from that is pretty much every piece of terrain had a data sheet, but none of us got it, because we weren't that interested in it. It was clearly a style of gameplay that we're not really going to do. So I sort of feel like we're missing out, and that kind of is actually might have solved some of the issues that we feel, if you talk about ITC and it all being, symmetrical tables, not that it is at every game, but, if that was a format, the Games Workshop terrain format tournament setting is completely different, where you bring your own terrain. It's all themed to your army, for example.
Yeah, again, I had my issues with the way GW rolled out that particular terrain pack, because I think ultimately it just became logistically very strange, and also the rules that we have seen for those terrain features are very, very strong. And I think there were a number of inherent issues with the way that GW had worked out that terrain point system, because these terrain features had very clear benefits for very specific army styles. And again, really entered into a scenario where it made gameplay even more unbalanced. And I think that is very counterproductive, really, to the long-term viability of the game. I agree terrain and boards are a very important factor, but I don't think we should really ever enter into a scenario where they become a part of your army list building process, because then it just gets a little bit too gamey and a little bit too obvious how it's going to go. I mean, obviously it gets really weird because there are armies and ethical ice cream van touched upon this. It does become interesting because obviously armies have very specific terrain features, and probably one of the most egregious terrain pieces is the Adeptus Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle statue, because
I thought you were going to talk about the Death Guard tree.
Well, again, I don't know what's happening to the Death Guard tree. At the time of recording, we've not received our copy of the Death Guard Codex, so we don't know what that's looking like at this moment.
So I did notice yesterday when I was browsing the terrain tab on the Warhammer website, the Games Workshop website, that they still sell that tree as part of the 40k setting. Now, if you know, that doesn't necessarily mean it's still going to be in that codex. You know, I'd assume it would.
Well, I mean, I'm guessing it would still be in there because it was a prevalent part of the army prior to the changes. But
let's not talk about the Gorgon there. Yeah.
Yeah, leave it well alone.
I keep dropping that one in every.
Yeah, you always got to bring that back. It's all got to come back to the Gorgon, isn't it? But yeah, my point is that like there are certain terrain pieces that come with very obvious value. Most notably, the Sisters of Battle, because that massive ruin that comes with the statue is insanely beneficial. The idea that you can literally just turn up to a game and go, "Cool, here is a massive ruin." That means that you can't shoot a third of my army turn one. It is insanely powerful.
Was it quite highly pointed, though?
Not absurdly. I mean, again, I can't remember the exact pointing of it at this precise moment in time, but it's not insane for what it is. And there were other terrain pieces that were particularly good and strong in the history of 40k. You had obviously the Nurgle tree, as we've kind of talked about. There were some interesting rules for the Tau terrain, the tide walls, and those kind of things. They enjoyed a certain level of play at certain points because they were quite interesting. But broadly speaking, like a lot of the terrain features that you can buy for your armies haven't really seen aggressive amounts of play since early 6th and mid 7th.
Yeah, those seem like the glory days where they kind of came out with it was a special supplement, wasn't it, initially?
I was watching in the rulebook, essentially. Yeah, it was the Aegis defense line, the Imperial Bastion, the
little two turrets, the bunkers. Yeah, there was a whole swathe of them. I think it initially came out, maybe it was 6th edition. There was, it had the Imperial Fist guy on it. It was like was it Fortifications? I can't remember what it was called, but it was. I think it was a standalone supplement. And then in 7th edition, it was in the rule book, if I'm not too mistaken. Oh, well, I could be.
No, I think you're absolutely right. There was a book released with a series of extra fortifications in it. You are 100%.
Yeah, but I think it saw a lot of play, but some of them were egregiously broken in terms of like the Sky Shield landing pad, a lovely kind of piece of terrain. But when you can put a vehicle on it and start your tank on there. And then not even a flyer. I think initially you could put vehicles on there. Which makes no sense. And then you would be like, the Sky Shield landing pad is up. I get a 4 up or 5 up in bun save. Haha.
It was a 4 up in bun save, yeah.
Yeah, pretty mad. Not very thematic when you've got vehicles on there that then either... I think at one point you could place them up there, but then they couldn't move off. Maybe there was all sorts of weird stuff. Like for a vehicle or for having a flyer on there, it sort of makes sense. Like turn 1, have a flyer on there. Turn 2, it's like taking off and it's on the table. Or even on turn 1, it's taken off, and it meant you could get your flyer on there before having to come in from reserves, for example, which back in those days you had to roll for, so it wouldn't be a guaranteed turn 2, for example. So there were some like cool stuff. I remember every guard player had an Aegis defense line at one point, and pretty much you would take it in every single game. It's like I even had to check before we did this that you can still, so the rules still exist for all of these things. In the 2019 chapter approved, so it's still all valid, but I think they just overcosted it to the point when no one's ever taking it unless you're maybe doing a narrative game or you're going to tie it in. And even then, like most of the time, whenever I've played at a tournament or an event and there's a bastion on the table, no one except maybe one person I can think of would be like, oh yeah, that's a bastion. Most people would be like, oh, it's just like, impassable terrain, you can't go in it or anything like that. I think one or two people, when it was in their deployment zone, would be like, oh yeah, I can totally put some scouts on here and I can now shoot the gun up the top or what have you. But most people wouldn't do that.
I find, like, again, there was an interesting time where towards the end of 7th edition, I was really heavily exploring the opportunity of rolling out a fortification army. I remember this, yeah, I was so invested in the idea of doing a Gene Stealer cult fortification army because I was like, Gene Stealer cult would work so well with fortifications at the end of 7th, but just as I started getting to work on it, they announced 8th, and I was like, oh, okay, fair enough, I'll scrap that. But yeah, I mean, that was an interesting aspect of the 7th and 6th edition rule set, was there was a real prevalence of those types of things. And even early 8th edition, there was an early, series of things going on in 8th edition where people really favored some of the really mad, older style buildings. So there was this like plasma cannon array thing.
The plasma obliterator. Yeah, I've still got the original version of that in its box, mint condition, which I think was everyone complained how difficult it was to build though.
Oh yeah, well our buddy Sean put one together and he said it was an absolute nightmare. But the point is that like there was a time where people were running that with Dark Reaper spam. So it was literally just loads of Dark Reapers inside one of them, just shooting out of it, and it was like, wow, this is crazy.
I remember. Do you remember when back in 7th, when the Void Shield generator came out and it literally sold out, and they never made it? I think they then remade it later on, but I think the original one was like resin, and then the second one that they produced was then in plastic or something like that. And but yeah, it had such good rules. Everyone was like, I'm getting this.
Yeah, everyone had one. Now they're they're like overstocked everywhere because no one really wants them anymore. But yeah, I just think that's that thing though, right? It's like, again, it was an interesting series of rules, and it is still an interesting series of rules. But again, it has been pushed further down people's priorities because ultimately the way it works, it just, certainly in like more competitive minded gaming, it just, there was no real easy way to roll out. I mean, one of the things that was really good about them back in the day was because you couldn't guarantee what terrain was going to be like anyway, it was nice to have some baked in options, because the Aegis defense line. So like me and Richie, for the longest time, were debating adding an Aegis defense line to our doubles army list, the Blue Meanies, because one of the hilarious advantages of defense lines were that you got 2+ cover saves behind them. So if you went to ground behind a Aegis defense line, you got a 2+ cover save. And when you're Zench Demons, you got to re-roll your 1. So you would have a 2 up in basically invulnerable save that you could re-roll. And we were like, that's genius. We need to be doing that. But yeah, outside of that, I mean, like, yeah, and the thing is, even the interactions that terrain added, the fact that you technically brought it to the table, but it didn't belong to you, was genius. It was like, here is the Aegis defense line. It's got a gun. while you control it, it's yours. But there used to be all these hilarious moments where you could seize control of your opponent's weapons. So like you could basically overrun their Aegis defense line and then turn their quad gun around on them, and it was just absolute genius.
Yeah,
So,
didn't you do that with some Tzeentch flamers that have a 2-up ballistic skill, which is mad.
Yeah. Well, we discovered at the time, so they were ballistic skill 5, which in 6th edition at the time meant that they hit on 2s. And yeah, we just did a really jammy deep strike where we managed to roll a hit, and then we flamed all these. We flamed all of these guardsmen off of this defense line, and then just took it over. And then the hilarious thing was is they had a Valkyrie that had to come on in their turn 2, and it came in, and we shot it down with these flavors. It was like, wow, this game's great. And those are the sorts of mad things that these sorts of things introduce, and some of these weird interactions that have just been sort of sterilized out of the game, really. It's like nothing fun like that ever happens anymore.
I think the closest thing I know of in sort of more modern stuff, not necessarily 40k because this is Age of Sigmar, so the new Seraphon Temple is absolutely massive. And in the latest White Dwarf, or maybe the second to last latest White Dwarf, they're sort of talking about the rules mechanic behind it and sort of explaining why your enemy can embark into it, because it's a bit like a bunker. They basically said it's too big to put on in your deployment zone. It gives you too much of an advantage, but also in some matchups you just can't physically fit it in your deployment zone, so it needs to be able to go somewhere randomly in the mid-table. So to then make it interesting, they said rather than it just being something that you can go into and get an advantage, make it a bit more of a challenge. Your opponent can also do that as well, but you still get some inherent advantages of only you can use its powers once you've got a wizard embarked on it. So that was an interesting thing that I wonder if they trickle those sorts of things down into some of the 40k stuff. Pretty much all the new faction specific stuff is, you can't really go into anything. Like the Hammerfall bunker isn't really a bunker. It's like a sort of mobile or immobile turret. If they do a guard one, I would love to see sort of the old Dawn of War style bunkers that you could put squads into. That would be really cool.
What was interesting about the Dawn of War stuff was that you had the underground trench network, so you could move between locations as well, which was quite cool. So like, even if they introduced stuff like that, because even that was represented in the old terrain rules, because you used to be able to have hatches. So you used to have escape hatches. Because that was a really common strategy for some competitive armies. They would have centurions in a bunker and then just have them appear. So Grav centurions would come out of a bunker via the escape hatch and just be like, "Hey!" have all these Grav cannons, which was obviously the height of fun. But yeah, look, I mean, I think in response to our man, the
ethical ice cream truck.
Thank you. Yes, the ethical ice cream truck. I think that system of making it into a third army that you actually have to assign points to and things, I think that's fine. I think that's a perfectly viable solution. I just think it has logistical challenges that I'm not overly thrilled about. But in terms of army-specific terrain pieces, I think that is something that hopefully GW continue to do more of and support more, and hopefully we end up in a situation where it makes sense. I mean, the thing is like, they obviously introduced that new marine terrain piece, which is that ridiculously massive gun
bunker. Yeah.
And the general consensus is it's a bit rubbish.
Yes, I think Necrons have got a thing as well, which is okay. The new Death Guard one, rumors are that it's pretty good depending on what you think is good. So some people are saying it's rubbish, other people are saying it's good. I think there's a general consistent theme for the last year or two where they're trying to do faction specific terrain. I don't think it will be free anymore, because they did that originally in Age of Sigmar, and I believe it's now gone to points. So I assume they won't do that it's sort of bonkers that, because everyone would just take it, and that would obviously sell kits, but they need to balance it. And I think at the moment they may be being a bit conservative on some of either the rules or the points. So for example, like the Imperial Knight one, where it's like, if you don't shoot for a turn, you can shoot at maximum number of shots in your second turn. But everyone says that my statistical average is actually more if I just shoot normally, so it's not very good, unless of course you roll like a pleb or something. I don't know. Anyway, his last point I'd like to point on, he talks about the fold-out boards being quite good. I do like the new Games Workshop style of boards that is sort of in line with the Kill Team stuff. I believe they're pretty much cross-compatible because they're all the same sizes. I think that's nice. They're double-sided, which I think is also really interesting. Again, a bonus from your normal kind of foam and mats, which has just got one design on.
Yeah, I don't inherently hate the card solutions over the mats. I think they both have the same pros and they both have the same cons.
For sure.
So yeah, that the one is as good as the other. I still don't think they're as good as custom jobs, but ultimately they serve a purpose and they're a great place to start, right?
For sure. I'll read out a couple more. We got Cantor Blue again. He said, not created yet, but one of my hobby resolutions this year is to create a gaming table with fully painted terrain, which will be an epic undertaking. And that's followed up by the Frozen Ferul. He replies to him and says, me and a buddy made a table late last year, so I'm fully on board with you getting scenery for a full board. So very positive aspects there. I think is a good ambition to do it, especially like with you and your friends. And one of the issues we were talking about earlier is like I think what happens is one person in the gaming group or friendship group is always nominated to be, you have the table and the scenery, you do all the work, and we come around to your house and play it.
I know it.
Yes. So someone like you maybe. And then also the other option is like you go to a gaming club where they sort of have got it all.
It's a definitely it's a good hobby goal, and one of the things is about terrain as well, though, is as mad as it sounds, you can get a lot of really quick wins with terrain, which really helps with hobby fatigue because it's very terrain. There's a lot of quick ways of doing it. I mean, I've been watching YouTube videos of people making massive terrain projects, and obviously you get Phil's account of things over the course of this section where he said it took him months to build, a 2x2 bit. I've been watching people who smash out in a day a 6x4 table, so it can happen.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's lots of quick wins, nice, easy techniques. So, for example, especially on like ruins or the Sector Mechanicum stuff, obviously lots of dry brushing, washes, oil weathering is really nice. The chipping weathering technique is fantastic. So you use either chipping fluid or hairspray. So you paint your undercoat down, you spray some hairbrush on top, you then paint or spray another color on top, which is your kind of final base coat, and then you use a brush and some water and you let that seep into the paint, and then you can start sort of scrubbing away and it peels back that top layer to reveal the color underneath. So what you do is your base coat is like a kind of tends to be a rusty color, and then your top coat is your kind of final painted color scheme. So it might be like cream, for example, or red, and then basically what you get is this nice kind of chipped brown rust color coming through underneath, and it's because it's quite organic, it looks really good, and that's like a nice easy win technique.
There you go.
We've also got a slightly different one, not necessarily to do at all with terrain, but I'll read it out anyway. Fat Flash Blog says, really impressed with the new formats. I like some rambling, but setting a limit is a great idea. Keep it up.
Come on, Phil. I mean, I admit that is obviously lovely to hear, and we appreciate that comment and the positivity within it. But come on, we got to have some actual questions related to the terrain topic, right?
We do. On our actual Lookouts 40k Instagram, we've got old Toke fan of a show, Folkstorm on Instagram. He basically said he made a hut from an old lotion pot back in the day. So, a bit of hobby.
He does like the lotion, does old Toke.
I know, yes. I bet he does. Quick Sauce was right. It says, I miss terrain rules like they had for the Minitorum container. Which, if you remember, when it first came out, they had the storm bolters on top that you went up next to them, you could control them and shoot the storm bolters.
Yes, that is correct. Yeah,
I could swear some piece of terrain had like an orbital strike, but I can't for the life of me think which one it was. If you could control it, you could cool down a strike.
So many weapon placements back in the day were usable by controlling players. So like early on in like 6th edition, it was funny. I was watching this video on a channel that used to be called Beast of War, now is called On the Tabletop, and they used to get this regular content where these two lads from Northern Ireland would do like competitive talk about competitive builds in 6th edition. And they actually went so far as to say is like, oh yeah, well, we've just discovered a bit of fluff in this, a bit of an exploit in this book, which is that you could, set up hunter-killer missiles as terrain features, and not hunter-killer missiles. Sorry, what are those giant missiles on tanks?
Oh, Death Strike missiles.
Yeah, you can get Death Strike missiles, set them up as gun placements on the board, and then use them in the game. So it's like saying, like somehow craftily you could turn up to a table and plant these. These like features on. I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, no one's going to go in for that. But
that does remind me that like Forge World did back in the day have some like missile silos, and they had basically Lehman Russ turrets as fixed emplacements, which I believe is sort of based on some World War stuff where they basically just dug in tanks into the ground and just had the turret poking up and sort of embedded them into the ground. So they're really old cool pieces of terrain.
Yeah. But no, I mean, I that's the thing. It's cool stuff. But the problem is people don't like that stuff in more controlled gameplay scenarios because it's a bit ugly, because it's not streamlined or standardized. Yeah. But again, normal fun playing with your mates, highly encourage you to incorporate some interactive elements into the board design. I mean, again, this is another little rule from the older editions, right? Do you remember mysterious terrain, Phil?
I was just about to mention this, and I was going to say I kind of hated it. I'm thinking more of mysterious objectives, where you'd go up to an objective and you'd roll some dice, and it's like, oh, I haven't got the cool one. I've got the one that's doing wounds to me every turn. Cool. Yes. The problem with that, though, is it's always so difficult to remember what you'd assigned to each thing.
Yeah. It was ridiculous. There was one that gave you Skyfire, wasn't there?
Yeah. I bet you won't remember this because no one ever had them. Do you remember it wasn't Catachan, it was Elder jungle terrain that they released? The Death World stuff. And the original rules of some of them were that they could move towards you and then do wounds and attack you. Sort of mad stuff. But it was that was probably the ugliest terrain they've ever done. It's like I got it as a concept, but it just didn't look very good.
Well, I think the problem was they obviously set out to try and create something a bit truly alien, and it just became too alien. It was like it just didn't look right.
I also think it was a bad sales pitch because they were like, oh, it's Eldari, we've got some Elder ruins here. Everyone was like, whatever. If you had said that was Catachan jungle terrain, dozens of people probably would have bought it despite it looking rubbish.
I think the weird thing is with it as well, right? And again, I don't want to speak ill of the work that anyone in the design team is doing at GW because, I think, well, not where it's not entirely warranted anyway, but I think one of the interesting things about all of that is the fact that it used to feel 5 years ago at least that the guys working on these terrain kits were nowhere near as skilled at sculpting as the guys doing the miniatures. So that's where things like the Death World terrain came along, or where things like that big generator came along, where it was just this absurd skull in circles.
Yeah, I've seen some cool, like the hot fix for that one is to take the big Minitorum container and turn that on its side and wedge it between the two, and then it looks okay actually. But a lot of the scenery terrain is just bedecked in skulls because that is the 40k trope. And even the old Cities of Death stuff just had that everywhere, and it's a bit gaudy and a bit much in places. Giant skulls, too much. I quite like the weird spider skull thing that hangs down from one of the Sector Mechanicum pieces, but again, a bit mad.
Yeah, even that was probably a bit too much for me, but I do take on board the point. I think there was some okay bits, but overall it was always a bit. Yeah. Anyway, there you go. Any more, Phil? Or
we've got a few more we can go through.
We'll do a couple more.
JPWH40K says MDF or plastic terrain. MDF all the way for me. If you're going to spend that amount on plastic terrain, I would rather spend on models. PS, expanding foam is everybody's friend, which is as I said before, great for sort of bases, hills, terrain. The LGT star quality sort of terrain as well. That's where that all came from. But yeah, I'm not a fan of MDF stuff because it just, for the most part, it looks very flat. Even when it is sort of laser cut and layered, it still just looks like it's layers of flat stuff stacked on top of each other. So it never really looks nice because you haven't got as much curvature or shape to stuff.
Yeah, I think the thing is, right, is like, it's interesting because to me, there seems to be a wide consensus that MDF terrain is infinitely cheaper than plastic terrain. And in a lot of instances, that isn't true, but it is true when it's compared to Games Workshop's terrain. Now, Games Workshop's terrain kits are insanely expensive versus
so expensive.
So when you factor in the other options in the market, I mean, Battlefield in a Box, I've really gone to town on, and that is essentially resin kits that are all pre-packaged and painted and the rest of it. And I was genuinely surprised at how little it cost to do a board in Battlefield in a Box. Like, I literally covered my 6x4 board in terrain for probably not much more than a couple of £100, which, okay, is not an insignificant sum of money, but I would have assumed it would have cost me the same to do it in MDF terrain, and it would have been much more of a pain in the bum to make that MDF terrain. And if I tried to do that in Games Workshop terrain, which, spoilers, I have, it cost infinitely more. Like, the Games Workshop terrain is so expensive and also horrible to build long term because the new kits are so detailed.
Yeah,
it takes long to build them.
I remember coming around to your house and we literally spent the day, and it was like clipping stuff off sprues, cleaning up mold lines, and that was all we did. And we did a big dent in a small pile. Well, we did a small dent in a big pile. And there was so much more to do, and that didn't even include building it. Even though I think you may be building it, and I was doing all the spruce stuff, or painting it and stuff.
I mean, I've built an absurd amount of that terrain, and I look at it and just, God, the time versus result process on that is just not equitable. It's very difficult to be positive about that overall. But anyway, there you go. It is what it is. Any more, Phil?
Yeah, let's do the last one. We actually, I'll do two because one of them is just a nice little review. Adameus Collins says, "Looking forward to listening to this one. Will help get through the 12-hour shift at work."
Well, I hope it has.
At least 3 hours of it will be of this.
Maybe we'll see how we get on.
And then old Archon John has returned to leave another comment. He said, "Do different themed tables have more or less types of terrain in the new 9th edition rules? For example, jungle tables have more dents, therefore -1 to hit terrain."
I mean, the short answer is yes, but that obviously depends on how heavily themed things are. If you're going to go for a heavy jungle table and you're really going to embrace that and you're going to actually develop something that's really, on theme, then that inevitably is going to be the case. that, -1 to hit is going to be way more prevalent. Again, obviously for most gaming purposes, you want a mixture. One of the things that's really important to me as well, and one of the things that I think is important to a lot of people, is the ability to place miniatures as well. And this is something that we haven't had a chance really to talk about, but I think on the topic of like jungle terrain, it's important because one of the other pitfalls of custom boards is you can go too far in the other direction, and then the playability of your board becomes very compromised, and that is something that you really want to deal with as well. You don't want to be in a situation where you are creating boards that it's really difficult to position models or to actually draw line of sights or to even interact with it. And I think that is one of the things that's always really interesting with these overly themed boards. Like when you see boards where they've stacked them really, really, really high, you can start to run into a lot of technical issues during gameplay. But yeah, look, I mean, obviously specific boards have specific things. We're not in the AOS situation where certain realms defer certain attributes. So one of the key mechanics of Age of Sigmar 2 has been the idea that you're fighting in the realm of fire, and as a result, all of these rules are attributed to the realm that you're playing in. That isn't so much the case here. But yeah, obviously.
You can get that in campaign stuff. So I believe it was the last Psychic Awakening book. There were specific rules for playing in different areas. There's some cool rules in White Dwarf, which I hope we will talk about one episode. They are called, oh my god, what are they called? Flashpoints. So it's over a series of articles over several issues set in a specific kind of sector with a bunch of special rules, custom missions, and also, again, like you said, custom sort of you're playing in X type of planets. You can get a bunch of extra rules sort of layered on top of your game, which I think is very nice and thematic, good for your fun-friendly games. Obviously not for tournaments, obviously, but I think for an average person, it does just add a nice layer of depth to your game to give it a bit more narrative flavor to it. And to arc on John's point, I think the other thing is, yes, if you were to out of the box go, okay, everything's jungles, it's all -1. And on one hand, that could be a great game, actually. But if you didn't want that, you could just give certain different bits of jungle different keywords. So this bit is obscuring because it's super dense, so you can't shoot through it. But then this other stuff is just, got the dense keyword. So I think even if everything was very similar and samey, you could still customize it via that keyword mechanic, which I think is very strong for coming up with your own stuff.
No, agreed. Interesting stuff there, Phil. A good topic by all accounts. Much said. I mean, look, in the general sense, I think the fact that we have so much choice is really great, but I really want and hope that if you take anything away from this segment is that I implore everyone to try and actually take advantage of those choices and to actually start to think about the surfaces that you're playing on and how you're playing the game and how terrain can impact gameplay. And I think that is so important because I think up till now, I think we've resigned ourselves to certain norms, and I think this is a good time for us to evaluate what it is that we want out of the hobby and how it is that we want these games to be played. And I think, at the end of the day, I'm not expecting everyone to go away and build their own custom boards and go crazy. I don't think that's realistic. But again, just try different things and try out different types of terrain. And, and even just, if you're initially feeling it out with friends, trying to see what different types of terrain brings, get a sheet of A4 paper, cut it out and write forest on it and slap it down on your board and, see if it actually changes things for you and, try things that are different, because actually you might find that it creates a lot of very interesting gameplay results, which maybe you're not experiencing because of certain rigid parameters that you're setting for yourself. Or you're someone who is already doing all of this and you've just enjoyed us agreeing with you, which is obviously also great. Because, I think I just feel like, and again, it might be indicative of the fact that I've just been exposed to way too much tournament stuff the last couple of years, but I feel like something has been taken away from the game with these new attitudes to terrain. Because here's the thing, Phil, 2-3 years ago, I didn't care about terrain nearly as much as I do today. Because terrain was just a given that it was this thing and it was functional and it worked, but it also was interesting and it added all these other strategic layers. Now that they've kind of taken it away from me and turned it into what they've turned it into, it's just become a bugbear, I suppose, if nothing else. But
yeah, I think it was weird. In 7th edition, there wasn't, I can't think of much terrain complaints other than maybe some of the faction specific stuff that you could take was too cheap or too good. But no one really went, oh no, the rules for woods or ruins were broken. They all seemed pretty adequate. I mean, I don't think even then tournament players, I mean, ITC at that point, it's completely its own thing. So they may well have house ruled certain things, but I didn't go to their events in those days, so I couldn't comment. I think it was the fact that the absence of terrain rules in 8th edition is what kind of was so glaringly obvious that now it feels like it's been brought back into 9th edition. It's a bit more of a hot topic, and they've gone in a particular direction. I think it's one of those things where, because we still haven't played a whole amount of games in this edition, it's still going to take a bit of getting used to. I think, like you said, you do need a balance. You need a nice smorgasbord of terrain. You don't want too much Wensleydale. You want a nice bit of cheddar in there as well. So you don't want too much in the way of ruins, but you do need some. You want to be able to create nice, interesting boards. I think, because I've been collecting terrain predominantly for my kill team, so I'm looking at it in a much more smaller scale. Even then, I'd love to expand it out to 40k sort of size, like normal size. I think verticality is a really fun thing to add into it, even if you're not necessarily going to use it all the time, but I think it should be there. I think, a good amount of things like crates, I think are a great one because they do block line of sight for some things. They do give a cover save for other things. You can stack them. My favorite thing that I've done in my pretty much every kill team board that I do, because obviously I don't want to put my ruins on the roads, so I have 2 buildings opposite a road, and then what I tend to do is dump a container on the road, so actually people can just cross using the container as like a bridge, which is a nice little mechanic from getting like objective A to objective B and stuff like that. So even if I was doing 40k, I would still sort of build those kind of levels up and have more of a focus on some upper level stuff. Yeah, I think partly though that's the reason why people don't use it. It's just the limitations of the rules now, because objectives are always on the ground floor. People just avoid the upper floors. So maybe that just needs to change from the rules, and it's
we need to start going down. That's the trick. Adding down as an option is a thing. But who knows? I mean, again, obviously you need specific types of setups for that. Interestingly, during the course of this conversation, I just started thinking, because I got loads of Zone Mortalis stuff, I started thinking I could start to build like an interesting kind of like trench network type thing where I make a Zone Mortalis board, but it's essentially a case of they're like these little kind of like like trench networks below, and then battlefield above.
I've seen some people do really cool Zone Mortalis boards where it's like a 40k board for like 3 quarters, and then 1 quarter is a Zone Mortalis board to represent like a bunker or inside a building. And it gives you that interesting strategic elements of cool. The vehicles can be outside fighting, but the infantry have to go into this particular section to fight over something that's here. There's some other cool boards that I've seen where, a bit like what we were saying before with rivers, but instead of rivers, it's like void combat, or you're up in the sky. So you've got these giant kind of floating platforms, whether they're meant to be out in space or they're up in the sky, like your Elysians, for example. And then what you do is you've got the infantry fighting in those areas. You've got flying transport zipping around between the platforms, but it blocks off whole areas of the game, because unless you're a flyer, you just can't physically go into the sky or into space in those areas. And those look fantastic when you see them built. Obviously, they are kind of much more custom jobs, but you could actually do that with a mat. You get like a sort of X-wing or some kind of Aeronautica style mat to represent the sky, and then actually even if you're just using the Sector Mechanicum stuff to represent your platforms, like your oil rigs or something. Like there's a fantastic Kill Team oil rig from Warhammer World. It was it was like a sort of 2x2 board, but then it went up like 1.5 meters in the air. It just was completely vertical. Woefully impractical to play on, I'm sure, but I was like, that would be the dream, to have something like that, because that would be pretty cool, I thought.
No, I totally agree with you, mate. I think that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, and in a way, Kill Team was so much of a system where Games Workshop showed off their creative clout when it came to what they were doing with the boards at Warhammer World for those. I mean, those are just some of the most incredible setups that they've created for that, and that's one of the great things about Kill Team. And ultimately, you have to forge you have to create a balance, right? You can't just have everything being like Kill Team boards, because the Kill Team boards understand that there are certain very strict parameters, i.e., only really infantry interact with this. And that is the thing with 40k, is you have to factor in all this other stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think it's interesting.
There's I don't know if you ever played on it. You might have done some Kill Team on it, but there's like a kind of turquoise mining table at Warhammer World. It's like platforms everywhere, loads of rocks. It is properly multi-level. It's properly really incredible. I think we've done some Kill Team there, but I played Richard. We did an actual 40k game on it. I think it was maybe only like 1,000 points. It was all infantry. We tweaked the rules slightly because I had a couple of Cyclopses, and we just allowed it to go up and down the ladders, for example, just to make sense from a practical point of view. He had a Helldrake buzzing around, which my Grenadiers managed to just melt her in the face as he charged at it, which was hilarious. So yeah, that was like severely limiting the types of units you could take. But really thematic, so much fun to play on. I liked the sort of, cool, there's an objective up here and I've got to run men down gantries and up ladders to get there. And yeah, it took me 3 or 4 turns to get there, but it was sort of worth it in the end. And those kind of takeaways are really great. And another thing to say, just in general, is playing on tables that are nicely set up, nicely painted, with a painted army is just so much more immersive. Like, the best photographs of my army and the best games I've ever played have always been up at Warhammer World, just because the terrain there's always been pretty fantastic.
Oh, incredible. I mean, yeah, we've had some great games in that environment, and it's been fantastic. And that's what you want. That's the best way to play this
standard, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And not everyone can do that all the time. And I understand everything that we've said has had, there are practical applications of everything. But it's interesting. All I'm basically getting at is, I think from a competitive standpoint, we need to reevaluate how we're approaching the game and terrain. And in a general gaming sense, I think, we should aspire to more than just mats and ruins. That's all,
Sure.
And that's it. There you go, guys. That was us talking about terrain, boards, the impact on the game, answering your questions. We hope you enjoyed it. We certainly did. We're going to move on now to whatever it is that comes next, which I know what that is. It's the end of the show. So let's get on with that. Transitional noise. And that's it, everyone. The end of the 69th episode of the Warhammer 40,000 podcast. No, I really enjoyed that chat, Phil. I thought it was fun.
It's good. It's nice to have a chat about something that isn't specific to a new release, like codexes. Just a bit of a general hobby chat. I sort of feel that with the releases going fortnightly for the next few months, that this might be a good little thing. Like, one week we'll do a codex or something, and the other week do something hobby related.
Exactly. Although the complication there is, mate, is we've got to think about things to talk about every week. I mean, at least when we were just following the release schedule, it was like, well, they put it out. Oh yeah, cool. We can just talk about that. And I think that is the challenge that we're going to face with this weekly stuff, is how do we actually keep it interesting going forwards if we run out of topics, I guess. Well,
I mean, we can open it up to the old listeners if they got some interesting ideas. I think we've got a good few in our bag, under our hat.
think still, but I'm just saying it's like one of those things. So,
Might
I mean,
happen.
obviously, next episode is going to be all about Death Guard, right? Because we're going to get Tim on and we're going to talk about the Death Guard army, I assume, because that's this. So we'll do that justice and we'll do a good Death Guard segment. So that's pretty cool. And then we can, and obviously this weekend when this goes out, they've got
the previews.
Yeah. Are you expecting to see anything in particular there, Phil? What's your dream scenario?
Oh, gee, I've not really thought about it too much. Obviously, a few things have like come out already, which is all AOS based.
Is that what it is? Do you want more Primaris Marines? Obviously.
Well, I do want the heavy intercessors to come out. I'm in no rush.
They just don't actually exist in reality. I'm talking about like new stuff on the horizon.
Well, obviously it's 40k. I don't think it will be Marines, obviously. Well, actually, no. Black Templars is the one that's been banded around at the moment. So Black Templar stuff, Black Templar stuff would be cool if it is.
Are they talking about Primaris Black Templars still?
Apparently, we're seeing. That's mostly old down to Valric. He's banging that drum.
Is he? Could you imagine? Right? Because like what that basically is like, could you imagine them going to town going, here is brand spanking new actual thematic Primaris stuff, and we just thought, whatever, we'll start with Black Templars. Like, come on, really?
Well, they've done, like the Crusade stuff, the Indomitus stuff is very thematic. But it's not you saying like Dark Angels haven't got any of their stuff, although Dark Angels is due to come, so we might see some Dark Angels. I think Black Templars is one of the few ones where it's like their look is much more different than and like Blood Angels for the most part, they are just Space Marines that are red. Like there's the odd units, whereas I think for Black Templars, it's like every model is meant to look a specific way. They're meant to have like their guns are meant to be chained to their hands to represent the sort of the eternal crusade that they're on, quite literally, and that they're always meant to be fighting.
So Valric's banging that drum, is he?
Yeah. I've seen him go on about it a few times. If it is Black Templars, I think it'd be amazing. They were one of the 3 chapters that I picked.
Would you do them, Phil? Though, if they turn around, do they go, here you go, Phil? Obviously not to you specifically, but if this weekend they go, here you go, mate.
I would be like, amazing. I will get round to this in like a year's or 2 time, and I will pick them up then, but not until my Minotaurs are done first. That's how I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
There's loads of rumors about the new game system that they've previewed with the logo. Loads of people going Battlefleet Gothic, more time, epic. One option
under a rock, mate. I've not heard anything about this. What's this?
Did you not see the preview? So when they talk about the preview, they showed all the game systems that they're previewing. So you've got Age of Sigma, you've got 40k, you've got Kill Team, Warhammer Underworlds, and Adeptus Titanicus were all the known game systems. And then there's this random blank logo where it's like some big news is coming. So lots of speculation as to what that would be. I mean, it could be anything. I mean, one option is it's a 40k. Well, no, because so this is a new system, not one that already exists. So yeah, things like Aeronautica, Blood Bowl, Necromunda aren't in this preview. But obviously Adeptus Titanicus is. So they are doing some specialist game stuff. It's not just all Games Workshop boxed games division. I suspect it will more likely be a Games Workshop box game division. My theory is because when they have been bringing out new specialist game stuff, it's always been announced around sort of October, November time because it's sort of for the Christmas release. So I don't think it's anything like Battlefleet Gothic. If it's going to be then looking at the sort of standard Games Workshop boxed game guys, it might be something like Hero Quest. So it could be shifting back from Blackstone Fortress to Age of Sigma to do a different one of.
Well, they already did. Isn't there a Hero Quest being done by like Mattel or something?
Oh, that's the actual physical game. Yeah, because the Games Workshop don't have the rights for it, even though they did a lot of the legwork for it. I think it's I can't remember. I think it's Hasbro doing it now, but they didn't. They weren't the company that originally did it.
Gotcha. Yeah, because it was MB before, wasn't
Yes,
it?
MB. I don't know if that was UK specific or MB did it everywhere, but they did the original Hero Quest in conjunction with Games Workshop. I don't think Games Workshop owns the rights to it though.
Gotcha.
Which is why Hasbro in America did that release a few months ago, and then it went international, I believe.
Gotcha.
So yeah, it could be a sort of Hero Quest-y type game. Could be 40k underworlds, so kind of competitive small teams on a board, hex board, for example. That to me seems like a bit of a no-brainer because of the popularity of the underworlds and its kind of deck building mechanic.
They could be bringing back that terrible Age of Sigmar TCG that they did a couple of years ago. What was that called again? Age of Sigmar Champions.
Yeah, I thought it was Champions something rather, or just Champions. Yeah,
I caved in and I bought the Founders
Edition one. Yeah, I remember.
I was just like, because I'm obviously you follow these things for years and you see how massively popular some TCGs become, and you think, Age of Sigmar's doing all right. And credit where credit's due to the guys who were pushing it back in the day. I mean, they were everywhere. I saw them at Comic Cons, and they were up at EGX, which is the Eurogamer Expo thing, and they were everywhere pushing this thing. So I was just like, well, they obviously taking it really seriously. So why not, for the sake of whatever that Founders Edition cost me? I literally haven't opened a single thing in it, except I've just literally lifted the lid off it and gone, okay, that's a thing.
And now its value's gone down in half.
Oh, of course it has. So if anyone actually wants to give me a good reason to send them a Founders Edition of that Age of Sigmar game, obviously a very good reason would be its original retail value. But I'd gladly get rid of it because it's doing nothing in my home. But anyway, it'd be interesting. Whatever system they introduce. I mean, again, obviously, Gothic would be an incredible thing to bring back for the community. Personally, I couldn't care less. Like, if they bring Gothic back, I'll be like, yeah, I don't care. Because, to me, the Gothic system just never really hit it off. Like, the guys at, what was it called? Drop Fleet. That was supposedly a really amazing fleet-based spaceship game from the guys at Hawk War Games or whatever they were called, the guys who created Dropship Commander before. And Dropship Commander was a really, really great game back in the early 2010s, 2013, 2014 time, because they'd done a really good job of creating a really interesting system. And in a lot of ways, I had hoped Adeptus Mechanicus would have borrowed from them and made Adeptus Mechanicus, or not Mechanicus, or Adeptus Titanicus, more like that. I don't know. I mean, obviously, it's going to go the way of at the end of the day, if you look at their hit list in specialist games over the last 4 years, they have thrown so many Age of Sigmar ideas at the wall. It strikes me that it would be sensible for them to start to unveil another 40k system. That being said, could it just be Warhammer Old Worlds?
Should be. I mean, that feels like it's a few years away still from what they initially said. So it'd be a bit odd to do a reveal for it here because they've kind of already revealed it. So this to me seems like this is going to be this year's big release potentially, because obviously the game system kind of is working on a 3-year cycle. So there's always 1 year where you get something like Apocalypse because there's no big release. Last year we had 40k. Did we have Age of Sigmar 2 the year before?
No, that was,
or was that Apocalypse year?
So 2019 was the Apocalypse year for 8th edition. Age of Sigmar 2 was 2018, and last year was obviously 40k 9th edition, and obviously in 2019, don't forget that they also had Space Marines, which were obviously massive. They really went to town and wrote those incredibly broken rules that are still plaguing us today that hopefully they'll get rid of over time, but not yet. But I don't know. I mean, if you did something from the 40k universe, it makes sense that it would be Gothic. I mean, it's such a low hanging opportunity for them. But I don't know. I just wouldn't care. If it was Gothic, I'd just be like, cool, whatever. But
I know what you mean. I think it's one of those games where I think I had some minis as a kid, and maybe I don't think I ever played it though. I always liked it, like the idea of it, and now I wouldn't get into it. I wouldn't buy it. I was a big Man of War fan. Actually, had that one. I would happily play it if someone was like, "Cool, I've got the box game. Do you want to have a game?" I'd be like, "Yeah, cool, totally down for that." But I wouldn't sort of invest money into it because it's like I've already done that with Titanicus and Necromunda, and I still haven't played them. And I'd much rather sort of get into those games more than Battlefield Gothic.
A system that they could re-explore and rejuvenate interestingly could be something like the Space Hulk or Space Crusade systems. I mean, something like that, quite interesting. Again, where they get the most success and where they get the most longevity is where they've got kits that are transferable between systems, right? As long as, because that's the sensible play, right? As much as Chaos Warbands was not a successful game, so much of it was taken and chucked into Age of Sigmar. Okay, fair enough. There are diehard Warband fans who will tell me that it's one of the best systems that GW's ever created, and so on and so forth. Irrespective of that,
sorry, you mean Warcry?
Warcry, sorry, yes, sorry. Yeah. Irrespective of that, it clearly hasn't moved the needle massively because they've pretty much given up on it at this point. I mean, I feel like that has kind of gone away now.
They literally just released a brand new box set game of it like a few months ago. So I don't think that's quite the case. But I think it is one of those things where most people will be like, oh, I don't see it anywhere, so it must be rubbish. But there will be thriving communities of it. Same with Blood Bowl. It's like you don't see it necessarily, but people play it. People play Adeptus Titanicus. I imagine it is nowhere near as popular as Kill Team, even though Kill Team hasn't been that well supported over the last year or so. Obviously, I think they're going to talk about the new Kill Team game because they mentioned the Kill Teams in there, so there's going to be a new version of that, still sporting the old logo, which features the old Warhammer logo inside it. So it'd be interesting to see if they're just going to keep that game as it is, and they're not going to like update it in any way to like 9th edition. I don't think there's that much that really needs to be changed.
No, I totally agree with you. I think it's great as it is, and I think they should just leave that well alone. I think that's an easy win for them. Just continue to support it and make it relevant. Yeah, I don't know. It will be interesting to see what we do. I guess at the point that a lot of people will be listening to this, they'll know about it.
True.
The topics of the dead and the divine have obviously started to make a lot more sense, though, as well, because obviously we saw today that they've leaked out the vampire countess for Age of Sigmar, which definitely has a dead vibe to her, right?
Well, exactly. And I say this as someone who's literally just 2 months ago finished making an undead female vampire in plate armor.
Yes.
In almost a similar pose. I'm kind of glad mine's come out first, and I did it. If this had come out, I probably would have bought it just out of laziness.
Of course.
But I'm so glad that there are tiny bats, because I wanted tiny bats around my one, and the old bats that you can get on in AOS and fancy, like the old models, are really crap, and they're giant bats. They're all rubbish.
Yes, I know the ones. They're like big flies, aren't they?
Yeah, basically. And I was looking everywhere, looking at third-party bats, because I like the idea of maybe like equipping her with a shield but not giving her a shield, so having something to either represent that or just to add in some extra motion into the model. So bats was what I was looking for, so I'm going to probably buy 1 or 2 of her and stick them on and see if it works. Nice. The shield's also really cool, so I might nab that as well.
There's a lot of really good qualities to that miniature, it has to be said. So I suppose the question then comes is, what's the divine aspect of it? Obviously, we saw as well some other Age of Sigmar stuff.
Some Lumineth kangaroos and horses of some kind, I believe they've previewed now.
But it's interesting to imagine if the divine could mean something for the 40k side of things.
So not quite tin hat theory time, but some of the previews have been for some Adeptus Ministorum priests. They have a particular backpack design which you can see on some of the new models. So the Ministorum priest from Blackstone Fortress, and the one that's having his brain sucked out by Luminor Cesares, they have that same thing, and that was one of the things previewed. So what we might get is, people have been saying like an Inquisitor game, or some kind of small skirmish game. Now, if my theory of a 40k Underworlds is true, that would be it's not necessarily a game I'd want to buy, but as you say, people will just buy it for the models. If they do faction specific teams, like in the same way that they've been doing for Age of Sigmar, where it's like, here's 5 to 10 new models for every single faction over the next year that are really cool, characterful, kind of standalone units, they get 40k rules. It's like sort of Blackstone Fortress, but in a much more bite-sized scale. That would surely sell like hotcakes.
It also can't be a mistake that the Adeptus Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle, are being sold alongside the Drukhari in their Drukhari box set, right?
What, in some kind of thematic way, you mean? Or
I mean, in terms of a release schedule way, like normally, like if you look at the series of dual kits that they've done, typically there is a dual release in there somewhere, right? So when they go, okay, cool, here is our box set, and it's Space Wolves and Orcs. There's some Space Wolf stuff and some Orc stuff. When there was the Forge Bane or whatever it was called.
Yeah, Forge Bane was Necrons and Adeptus Mechanicus.
What happened? Necrons came out?
Yeah, let's shift all of those Necron models 1 year or 2 years before the new Necron range comes out.
That Necron book came out around the time. Well, that box set came out around the time the Necron book dropped. So there was a synergy there. It's just obviously
Forge Bane is pretty old. Like it.
Yeah. But Necrons is pretty old. Like the Necron book in 40k came out in like 2018 time, around the time of Forge Bane.
Oh, sorry, you're not talking about the 9th edition one. You're talking about
no. I'm talking about when they released the Mechanicus set and the Necrons.
Okay, right, I get you.
I'm saying that typically the way it's worked is they've gone, here's a box set with 2 things in it. Here's the rules for 2 things.
So you're thinking Sisters 9th edition Codex and Drukhari 9th edition Codexes on the way? I mean, that would sort of make sense.
Who knows, right? Because the Sisters book is really new, so it wouldn't make sense in a lot of ways to revisit them, because they've just had an entire range refresh. So, but then, funnily enough, though, right? If you look at every time that GW's done a range refresh or done a big release for stuff, you look at the Drukhari when they released those in the 2010 period, 2009, whenever it was, and then you look at Genestealer Cult. They always had lots of like dribs and drabs of extra.
Just look at the Luminef. Like, that was a brand new faction that came out last year, and already they've gone, here's new units for it. And it's like, your codex from last year is already out of date. So I wouldn't be surprised if, potentially it's not a Kill Team style game for Underworlds, but potentially the Ministorum stuff is just models for the Sisters, and they're getting a couple more models and units. There are a couple of ranges of HQ choices, Crusaders that are still in like resin that need to be updated. So maybe there is a bit of a backlog of we'll give you some more models or some brand new units potentially.
Yeah, and again, I'm gripping at straws at this point in time. Like, I have no idea whether that means, because again, I think if you look at like Ghost Walker or whatever it was, which was Craft World and Space Marines, there was nothing in there that I think got released outside of. Oh, maybe the Spirit Seer model was there. I can't remember now. There are maybe examples in the histories of it, but if you look at like, I don't know, the Khorne Demon and Slaanesh Demon kit, they both got new stuff, right? Like, they got new sculpts for the Khorne stuff, new demon kits for the Slaanesh, and then obviously Slaanesh got a big release, and I don't think the Khorne guys got a big release at the time, but irrespective, it's like, typically certainly in the early days of a game system. But it'd be interesting, man. I mean, I'll be really interested to see. I mean, because that's the thing that's really exciting right now is what are they doing next and what are they going to actually massively update? Your point about the Templars sounds really interesting, but I swear to God, I really don't want them to do that next time. It's like, oh man, like if it is that, great, fine, whatever, let's get out of the way and move on. But
I'd be surprised if it was anything other than like a Primaris character and like an upgrade pack. I don't think it would be if it was. I can't imagine it being unique units unless because the thing with Black Templars is they've got the whole issue of you've got your standard Marine, your tactical squad is really Marines plus neophytes, which are scouts, and that doesn't translate at all into Primaris. So it'd be interesting to see if they could take that concept and update it to Primaris units somehow, and what they would do with that as a unit.
Well, let's be honest, they're not going to. Wow, I mean, if they do, that'd be crazy. Could you imagine that they went, okay, there you go, Primaris scouts, just for that would.
No, I don't think they would do that. I think it would be more likely a character and an upgrade pack. Because I think not even this time last year, when the Space Marine Codex 2.0 came out and everyone got their supplements, everyone was crying out for Black Templars as getting some love, and they didn't get anything. So, a year's time, is that enough for them to go, here's a sculpt or two that we can give you?
Do you think they Primarisfy any of the existing characters, or do you think they'll give us a new character?
They do like to go, you can keep that old sculpt. Here's another character who sort of looks like he should be a Primaris version of an old character, but he's got a different name. So, yeah, they could go, it's not Grimaldus, it's not Helbrecht, it's Jim Bob, the new guy from... It could be that, but I'd like it if it was an old character, if it was... Say again.
They bring back the old Imperial Fist Sigismund, the first Templar.
Well, they could do. Do you know what I would want? I want not even Grimaldus. I want his Cenobite servitors. I want 40k servitors in the new scale. There needs to be more of them. I haven't done servitors yet in plastic. That's what I want. I want acolytes. I want scribes. I want all the menials. I want faction. Imperial Adeptus Menialis, and they are the guys carrying your books and your ammo, lots of cherubs, lots of servo skulls flying around. Honestly, that is what I want more than anything out of a 40k range.
And their army-wide rules is they're just writing everything down while they're getting murdered, so it's like they're not bringing anything to the table, they're just there.
Exactly. Honestly, I would just my plan is to get some and make them. I was going to do it with my Black Templars when I was planning to do Black Templars, but I'll still do it with my Minotaurs, and it's be like, cool, these are just my wound counters for every unit and character that I've got.
Well, I mean, they go down the Black Templar route. I mean, that'll be. I've got such mixed feelings about it. It depends what they do, if they do it. Like, to hear that is potentially on the cards, really like, oof, yeah. But then I might see it, just be like, wow, it's the best thing ever. Wow, I'm so.
Well, the thing is, so if they give you if they do a faction. Sub-faction specific unit, which they haven't done yet. Well, they historically have done, but they haven't done it for Primaris. That does open the way for things like Dark Angels and Blood Angels to start getting these kind of older units upgraded into Primaris. So that will potentially be a good sign.
Yeah, they've technically done it for Ultramarines, and they've technically done it for Space Wolves. So Space Wolves have got
the Vitrix Honor Guard, didn't they?
Yeah, Ultramarines got Vitrix Honor Guard. But outside of that, no one else has any Primaris specialist units. Maybe, hang on, let me really, really think about this. No.
Not beyond, we've just taken a unit and we've painted them a different colour. So you've got, obviously...
Aren't that? So Victrix Honor Guard are legitimately an Ultramarines only.
Yeah. But I mean, so with the Space Wolves, you've got that new Reaver squad, which is just a Reaver squad with some special rules. And obviously, Blood Angels have the Death Company Primaris version, but it's just a regular Primaris, but painted a different colour. And I think they might get a couple of extra war gear options, but that's kind of it. If they did, but I don't. Not sure.
Yeah, weirdly, you can mix up their weapons, so you can actually have bolt rifles and chainswords and things.
That's cool.
That,
yeah, I think if they do it, it'll probably maybe the special, not even special units are just going to be like 1 or 2 models as opposed to an entire 5-man squad of something.
Wouldn't it be mad though if they go, right, here is a full Black Templar range, and then all your Blood Angel players and Dark Angel players are like, what?
Screaming
like,
into the void.
I mean, at the same time, right? I mean, they've got to start with something, and I suppose if it is that they start to introduce new specific Primaris stuff for the Templars first, then fair enough. But I don't know, man. I wouldn't. Oh, who knows?
I mean,
right?
I'm not expecting it to be. If they did Black Templars, I wouldn't expect it to be like a whole unit. I would expect it to be a character or two, an upgrade pack, or the unit is Cenobite servitors. Like, I don't think that. Yeah, if they did Neophyte Scarman, that'd be interesting. But
I think if they did a really interesting like upgrade kit for, say, the Assault Intercessor kit, where it was like actually you got like the robes, and then you got maybe the chained on sword arms.
Yeah.
Then that would be cool. Because the thing is, if they did the standard clamshell single sprue, here's a bunch of shoulder pads and here's a bunch of Terminator not Terminator, like
Gravis
shoulder pads. So they're just whatever. But yeah, if they go to town on it and do something, an upgrade kit that's really, really on point, then I think that's going to be exciting, man. But yeah, I mean, honestly, they are bottom of my list at the moment. I would love to see a fantastic Craft World update or something along that line.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'd like to see Guard, for God's sakes.
Oh my God! Did you see the funny? It was like a meme going around of Guard through the ages, and I think it was from either 4th or 5th edition all the way up to the current edition, and it's the same Cadian Shock Troop model. That's a lot of additions.
Well, I mean, again, as an Elder player, I can beat most of those stats because a lot of the Elder range hasn't changed since the early 90s.
True.
So
yeah,
you know.
I would hope that in 9th edition, a lot of these ranges do get a bit of a bigger refresh.
They really need it, mate. They really need it. But again, and what would be really interesting as well, I suppose, last thing on this Templar rumor nonsense. If they were to go, here is Templar specific Primaris stuff, it's again another nail in the coffin of Firstborn, right? That's another Firstborn, they're heading to the woodshed.
I don't know. I think there's still lots of love. I sort of generally feel like it would be a New Coke situation where they would be verging on phasing out Firstborn, and then what they do is they go, here's a whole new range of resculpted Firstborn
they're totally going to do that
in sort of true scale size, not quite Primaris, but be uniquely different, like the Heroes range, which are kind of new sculpts. I could imagine they would do that at some point because obviously they need to sell more Primaris and more Marines, and in say 5 years' time, would they just keep churning out Primaris, or will they be like, people now want old Marines?
It's a great marketing ploy on their part, isn't it?
Because the thing is, I think loads of people love the concept of the old style Marines, but are just put off by the sculpts because they're so old and they don't proportionally look very good. So I think thematically they both have a place in the world and in the lore, but I think they need to update those sculpts if they're gonna keep them around much longer.
No, I totally agree, mate. Totally agree. Right, okay. Well, look, there you go. I reckon that pretty much wraps up the show. I don't know how long that's going to have gone for, but it seems to have been a while. If you would like to support us in any way, shape, or form, we don't ask for your money. In fact, actually, funny little story, we actually had some people reaching out to us to try and advertise with us recently. We told them where to go, didn't we, Phil? We said, no, none of that here. We don't want your
We actually
money.
said, unless you're going to pay us, no. But we didn't even say that. We just ignored that.
We didn't even say that, mate. We didn't even say that. We actually had some people reach out to try and appear on the show that we didn't really know that well as well, which was one of those things where it was like, not really sure what that's going to sound like, so decided against it.
I mean, we haven't. I think also just in general, I'm sure we will have guests on like next week. We've got Tim on. He's a good mate of ours. but also we did initially just want to get the format of just the two of us, the Joeless, down, and I think we're sort of getting there. So I think, eventually we'll get some rock star famous people on. Totally. Soon Lawrence will be knocking on our door going, please, can I come on your I've heard it's the best thing, but
I will say no to him as well. Get out of here.
No, not Lawrence. Not Lawrence.
No, he can put up some big numbers. You got to support the numbers. No, I don't know, man. It's interesting though, isn't it? Because I think that's one of the things that's becoming really interesting about the project for us is that, like, we're approaching it with a new lease of life and we're approaching it with a new attitude, but it is still the same old thing. And there's still a lot of the same stuff in there in terms of our reservations around doing stuff for the sake of doing it. Noting that obviously we've had people appear on the show where, it didn't quite work in the past. And I think that's one of the things I'm really protective about is I don't really like the idea of just getting people on for the sake of it. Bizarrely, I'm more likely to get people on who are like big fans of the show who talk to us on a regular basis than I am to get like some bigger people on. I mean, our most recent one, we had Valric appear, and that was purely because we started talking to him because of, weird life circumstances, things, just came to know him. And we got on so well with him. It was so difficult not to sort of take advantage of the opportunity to get him on because it just works so well because he's a genuinely lovely bloke and easy to talk to. But then when you find some other people who aren't quite as comfortable in that scenario, it turns into one of those things where it just doesn't quite work as well. And the last thing I want to do is do another Scary type podcast, not to name names. But
you gotta stop bashing his name. I don't think it was that bad.
On a personal level, it just didn't work on this show. As far as I'm concerned. Maybe someone out there thinks differently. I've not got anything against the guy. It just didn't work. And I don't want to become that guy that just gets people on for the sake of getting people on.
For the numbers.
And I know you're going to tell me, Phil, you're going to comment, Dan, cut that out. Don't shame him. I'm leaving it in. Because I'm not shaming him. I'm just pointing out that that's an example of where it didn't work. No, I hear he's gotten better these days. I hear he's probably more on point if we should get him on today, do a compare and contrast.
Oh, well, yeah, maybe. I mean, yeah.
We got history. We got form. We'll get Paulie on.
He's got a big crowd. He's got lots of followers, so,
Exactly, and look, he's a great guy. I mean, on a personal level, really enjoyed chatting to him as a person, but yeah, just within it just didn't work with our show format.
Well, I think to an extent, it's like if he came on to talk about, for example, the new Drakari Codex, perfect. But I think we got him on and we weren't really talking about that, and it was just more like, cool, what did you do?
I think to Scari's defense, right? It wasn't his fault that it was bad. It was our fault it was bad because we didn't know him. We just were like, we saw the number, we saw the opportunity, and we went, we want that. We want the notoriety. We want the prestige. So we chased it and we went, cool, let's get him on.
No, he just seemed like an interesting person and he was the first to approach us.
I mean, honestly, from my perspective, I was all about the numbers back then. I was like, yeah, cool, get him on because it will help grow our show. And then, it's not a surprise that that's the first show we ever did like a trailer for and all this. We tried to leverage him because that was exciting to us back then. But then you realize that you've done him a disservice because we didn't really, I didn't anyway. I didn't know enough about him. And then I just sort of found myself sort of padding out for time and it just turned. And that's the thing, man. I just haven't got the discipline to research these people enough to want to bring them in. Because ultimately I did my job. It's not them, it's me.
It's like, at least you're owning it.
Exactly. So apologies if it seems like I'm being rude to Scary. It's not his fault. It's my fault. I'm just a terrible interviewer unless I know who you are. And that's how it is. Right, Phil?
Completely. Okay.
So anyway, there you go. We've been approached by some people. We haven't said yes to them yet, but we might do. We might change our mind. Who knows? But yeah, we're going to get Tim on next show. When the Drakari drop, we'll probably get Paulie on because he's always been great when he's come on and we get on really well with him. So looking forward to getting him on the show. Get him doing that. And then at some point we need to get Richie on.
Surely we get Lawrence on for the Drakari episode. Get
big
man.
Big man. Mate, if you can get him, bring him along.
I chat to him on Instagram like twice in my whole life. I'm sure I could hook him up.
I've had many phone conversations with him over the years, and I speak to him at events. And he's always lovely, but yeah, I mean, I'm sure he'd be great, but I don't think he's going to be clambering over himself to appear. Do you?
I imagine he's too busy. Although didn't he do Paulie's Real Space Raiders podcast?
Oh, did he?
Well, I heard he was going to. I don't know if he actually has, because obviously I'm not a Drakari player. I don't listen to his podcast.
Come on, Phil. You're not supposed to be so cruel to Paulie and his efforts over at Real Space Raiders.
I mean, if I was to do a Krieg podcast, which this often is, I don't expect him to listen to that. Like,
fair enough. That's fair enough. You're a fair man in that respect. You only speak the truths.
I listened to the very first one just out of curiosity.
Well, because Joe appeared on it.
Yeah, I wanted to see how good he is on other people's podcasts and if he actually shows up or not.
Well, spoilers, he's mostly terrible on other people's podcasts. No, and again, this obviously sounds really bad, but one of the funniest things about Joe is I think he's the best he could ever be here with us because we're his actual legit friends. Whereas wherever else he appears, he just sort of does it out of some weird sense of obligation to people. And he's always sort of
he's paid to do it because it's work now.
Oh yeah, for work stuff, but he always takes on this really dour tone by comparison. He doesn't seem like the man you've come to know here. He feels like Joe under duress. I would leave that in there as well. Whatever, right? Let it roll. Let's be controversial this week. Let's stoke the fires.
Let's have as many internet fights with as many celebrities from the 40k world as we can. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, no, as I said, it's all on me, man. Like it's a lot of the time it's down to my fault that these things don't go as well as they should do, and I own that. But at the same time, I also understand that I want to try and navigate, and that's what makes us quite awkward in terms of who we will and won't work with now, because it's that thing where it's like if it doesn't just work out of the box, I'm just not interested in working at it. It just I just like to pick it up and put it somewhere and go, there you go, it functions. Whereas if I have to put extra effort in, I just don't have capacity for it. Between editing this, going through the motions of even learning about some of our main segments and keeping things interesting, is this, I don't want to suggest it's a lot of work, because that would be, I think, insulting to people who do a lot of work, but it's not work. You know what I mean?
For sure.
But there you go. There's a bit of a unnecessarily honest insight into things. And that's the end of the show. If you want to support us, as I say, reach out to us on social media. Tell us that that you think we're the worst people in the world or whatever, or maybe say nice things, such as the 5-star reviews. They were always really appreciated. And we do really you guys do that. So thank you. Obviously, as well, we don't say it enough, but obviously, stay safe. It is a crazy topsy-turvy world out there at the moment. So, obviously, we hope all you guys are doing well in your own lives and your own worlds, and that, nothing's going terribly wrong for you. And we hope in our own little way that we're able to help you guys escape from and enjoy your day-to-day existence in these otherwise turbulent times. So, yeah. Phil, any closing thoughts before we say goodbye?
That was quite a weird tangent at the end. Hopefully we haven't offended anyone too much. Obviously, all meant in good jest and humour, I think.
Yeah, exactly. It's a joke.
Yes, yeah, all a joke. All very good.
Rubbish on.
Yes. Thanks for listening, everyone. It's been appreciated. Yeah, rack up those 5-star reviews and we'll read them out, or reach out to us on Instagram when we ask for feedback on next week's topic, which will be Death Guard, which we actually know for a change in advance. So drop us a message over on the Instagrams or Facebook or the YouTube comments.
There you go. Don't forget that YouTube. All right, guys. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Bye-bye. Bye.